philosophy club, to the new organization that I guess is the Dallas College Philosophy Club. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present this paper, which has been accepted for publication in the Journal for Humanities and Social Sciences. And Jeff has the topic right. The official title is "He Doesn't Think He's Lying: The Moral Significance of Donald J. Trump's Linguistic Practices." The "he doesn't think he's lying" is actually a direct quote from Kellyanne Conway, one of President Trump's now former top advisors, and it gives an insight into the theoretical framework for this paper. So this paper is originally 23 pages, so I had to pare it down. So hopefully it will still make sense given the streamlining that I've done. Okay, so here goes. So the above quote from former White House aide Kellyanne Conway aptly sets the stage for an examination of current political discourse in the United States. As we near the completion of Donald J. Trump's term as U.S. president, this is an appropriate time to take stock of a central ethical aspect of what I will call the Trump phenomenon. Through an analysis of his linguistic practices, this paper will illuminate this phenomenon, showing how defenses of his tenuous relationship to truthfulness shed light on the moral worldview of Trump and his supporters. An enduring concern for many has been the, at best, casual relationship to truth and facts Trump demonstrates. At least as concerning has been the standard, or lack thereof, for truthfulness to which his supporters hold him. Trump's critics, thinking they have caught him red-handed in an obvious falsehood, continue to be flabbergasted and dismayed by how his supporters either seem not to care or find a way to construe the alleged falsehood as somehow being true. Calling attention to Trump's inclination for mendacity, though, miscasts what I argue is the more fundamental issue. Trump and his supporters, I suggest, do not take him to be doing anything wrong, for example, lying. I will argue that this Trump phenomenon, Trump's relationship with truth and his supporters' willingness to believe him in the face of seemingly overwhelming countervailing evidence, can be illuminated by understanding it in light of moral theory. The moral schemas described by cognitive linguist George Lakoff in connection with divine command theory will help us to better understand political discourse in the Trump era. By applying the meta-ethical implications of Lakoff's work on moral schemas and drawing from divine command theory, this paper will illuminate the phenomenon of Trump regularly stating untruths and his supporters not regarding them as such. Lakoff's schemas for describing the American political spectrum are comprehensive and analytically brilliant. He sheds light on big picture issues and helps us to understand how details fit into the big picture. For example, he demonstrates that conservatives adhere to what he calls strict father morality, and that progressives adhere to nurturant parent morality. These schemas, based on models of literal families, wherein those adhering to strict father morality value the authority and protection provided by a literal strict father, and those adhering to nurturant parent morality make the nurturance provided by parental figures. They emphasize that, and these models have remarkable explanatory power. Conservative adherence to strict father morality explains the apparent inconsistency of opposing big government while promoting its involvement regarding a matter so personal as that of a woman's reproductive health. According to strict father morality, a literal strict father has absolute authority to determine right and wrong, as well as the appropriate consequences for those under his charges for having done either. According to the framework entailed by strict father morality, reward and punishment, such as would be administered by a literal strict father, bring about moral strength. Behaviors that lead to unwanted results, such as unplanned pregnancy, are due to moral weakness. According to this feature of the strict father morality worldview, the undesired outcome of an unplanned pregnancy would be discouraged by the unavailability of abortions. Also, the unavailability of abortions cultivates moral strength by promoting abstinence, which requires self-control. Since, according to strict father morality, individuals are solely responsible for the outcomes of their actions, if an individual engages in an activity that results in an undesired end, for example, pregnancy, that individual bears the responsibility for this situation. The availability of abortion undermines the strict father morality worldview by allowing people to avoid responsibility for the consequences of their behavior. Thus, the only role an appropriately small government should play in this case, according to the strict father morality worldview, would be to ensure that abortion is unavailable. We see then that strict father moralists are not being hypocritical by believing in small government and opposing abortion. Rather, they are being consistent in their commitment to the ideal that individuals are responsible for the consequences of their actions. Lakoff also provides the tools to reconcile the seeming tension between progressive emphasis on tolerance, while nevertheless being intolerant towards groups that often align themselves with American conservatism. Indeed, a persistent conservative complaint about liberals is that they are hypocritical concerning tolerance. On the one hand, progressives embrace tolerance concerning minorities in terms of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, and so on. On the other hand, progressives express intolerance towards those with conservative views, so the charge goes. Nurture and parent moralists value cooperation, empathy, and social connection. These ideals, while they might often entail tolerance, are distinct from tolerance. Tolerance, rather, might be better understood as a means for achieving these ideals. When tolerance for a given group, for example, white supremacists, does not promote cooperation, empathy, or social connection, then adherents of nurture and parent morality are acting in conformity to their worldview by not embracing tolerance for white supremacists. This scenario is precisely what plays out when adherents of nurture and parent morality counter-protest against white supremacist demonstrations. Excuse me. It is not the case that nurture and parent progressives are inconsistent by being intolerant of, say, neo-Nazis. Rather, they are consistently adhering to their value of, for example, empathy by repudiating those who reject it. Excuse me. Returning to strict father morality, moral strength is valued and is straightforward regarding the placement of responsibility on individuals. According to the strict father morality worldview, moral strength is more likely to lead to long-term excuse me, success than moral weakness. Thus, those who have achieved success are likely to have done so through moral strength. Accordingly, success implies moral strength, making success, by definition, deserved. Those who are legitimately, by strict father morality standards, at the top, then deserve their status. Sorry. Excuse me. For example, in an actual family in which strict father morality is practiced, the father's authority is regarded as legitimate and is unquestioned. The role of those supported by the strict father is to uphold the father's authority. This idea extends metaphorically in a broader societal context in which the upholding of the strict father morality system itself is among its highest priorities. Reinforcing the idea that the authority of the ultimate authority, be it an actual father, a leader who is regarded as legitimate, or God, is unquestioned. Okay, so that's on the overview that I have time for on Lakoff. So now to an overview of how divine command theory applies to my argument. Ethics consists of three subdisciplines: descriptive ethics, metaethics, analytical ethics, and normative ethics. The first is concerned with what, in fact, are the moral codes of a given community, typically the domain of social science. The third, normative ethics, is concerned with what we ought to do. Metaethics is concerned with the meaning of moral language. Understanding the metaethical significance of divine command theory will, I argue, shed light on the Trump phenomenon as a manifestation of strict father morality and divine command theory. The point is not that all adherents of strict father morality are divine command theorists, although I would speculate that many are. Rather, divine command theory provides an established frame of reference to understand the medical aspect of strict father morality. For advocates of divine command theory, following God's laws is the essence of morality. In other words, morally right means commanded by God. Plato's Euthyphro illustrates the stakes of such an approach to the meaning of moral language. If a given act is morally right, it is right because it is loved by the gods. The question is it right because it is loved by the gods, or do the gods love it because it is right? For advocates of divine command theory, that a given act is divinely approved means that act is right. The contrasting view would be that the gods love a given act because that act is right. However, such a view runs counter to the authoritarian perspective shared by divine command theory and strict father morality, in that a given act would be right or wrong, independent of what the relevant authority deems to be so. For strict father morality and divine command theory, that the relevant authority approves or disapproves of a given act is what makes it right or wrong. When teaching divine command theory in my ethics classes, students are able to grasp the normative aspects of divine command theory with relative ease. What God dictates is what to do. Difficulty arises, though, when it comes to understanding the meta-ethical component of divine command theory, the idea that God dictates the meaning of ethical concepts. That is, an act is right if God declares it so. There could be no objective, non-divinely determined concept of what is right. Otherwise, we no longer are dealing with the theory of ethics, wherein God is the ultimate determinant of moral correctness, such as is the case with divine command theory. This idea can be illustrated using a provocative case. Murder is right if God says it is right. That is, by virtue of God's having declared murder to be right, it is thereby right. To use the language of the Euthyphro, what would make murder a right act is that it is loved by the gods. With these overviews of strict father morality and divine command theory in mind, we can see that the affinities between strict father morality and divine command theory, especially at the meta-ethical analytical level, illuminate much of the current political discourse. If it is not clear already, it will become plain to see that authoritarianism is a common theme between strict father morality and divine command theory, since for both of these approaches to the meaning of moral language, what constitutes a right moral act is defined by a figure who is regarded to be the ultimate authority. So here's the central thread of the argument. I'm getting ready to wind down. So the central thread is to say, to be clear, I am not arguing that Trump and his supporters are promoting a narrative that is simply counter to the truth. Such an analysis would be insufficiently nuanced. Rather, I am arguing that the meta-ethical thread shared by strict father morality and divine command theory means that whoever is regarded as the legitimate authority determines what counts as truth. As the meta-ethical aspects of strict father morality and divine command theory suggest, they regard legitimate authority as perfectly within its rights in defining the meaning of key terms. In a similar vein, when Trump indicates that he cannot obstruct justice because, quote, I'd be obstructing myself, he should be taken to be saying something about the meaning of justice versus some objective characterization of obstruction of justice. I argue that we are misunderstanding Trumpism if we take him to be saying something about the facts and whether they align with obstruction of justice in this case. I suggest that Trump means, and his supporters take him to mean, something more along the lines of dictating what key terms, in this case, obstruction of justice, shall be taken to mean. We miss the mark when we say, Trump makes statements that do not align with the facts, and thus he is a liar. To be clear, I am not suggesting that Trump is truthful. Rather, I am arguing that a more nuanced way of understanding the Trump phenomenon is to realize that he is not merely making utterances that do not align with the facts. Rather, when he uses language in a way that seems mendacious, he is best understood as taking himself to be dictating the meaning of that language, as do his supporters. For example, when Trump suggests that he cannot obstruct justice, since as the president, if he does it, it is legal, he should be taken to be making a definitional claim, not a factual claim that may or may not correspond with what is the case. And I believe that's probably all we have time for now. So I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Dr. Hilbert.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, do any of the students have questions or with the professors? Nobody wants to delve a little bit deeper into this claim?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Efren, go right ahead. I think you're on mute though.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, Professor Hilbert, would you say basically, like, sounds like what you're saying that like Trump in many ways is kind of like the first like postmodern president in this sense where like it's not the substance that matters, but more like power and like I guess like images that matter for him with regards to like the truth and whatnot.
I think that's a pretty fair characterization. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Jean Baudrillard.
Yeah, a bit, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was writing this, some of his ideas actually came to mind. The idea, the representation actually becomes more important than reality, and we kind of get to the point where reality is made so unstabilized that it's kind of questioned, and we sort of see that going on in real time. You know, for example,
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Is the election decided or not, for example? Yeah, so we've kind of reached, as you put it, this postmodernist inflection point where that question almost doesn't have meaning to a lot of people. Yeah, that's a good observation. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah, great question, Efren. Yeah, Efren and I have talked along those lines recently as well in my office hours. So very, very apt presentation for his presence here. Anybody else? And feel free to
Orlando.
Well, yeah, feel free to either raise your hands or typically what we do in the chat is we'll put an exclamation mark. And so if you put an exclamation mark, that means you're up next to pose a question or chime in or what have you. And we'll have the Philosophy Club officers and myself monitoring the chat, kind of going back and forth. So if you see me looking down, that's kind of what I'm doing.
I think Orlando has his hand raised.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Interesting question, Orlando. Did you guys hear that?
I couldn't hear the question.
No, he's. I think he's on mute. But next we have Rivera. If you want to unmute yourself and propose your question.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Nate. I wanted to ask this phenomenon, Trumpism. what made, in your view, the Republican Party the perfect breeding ground, if you may, for the development of such a thing? It seems extreme, but when you explain it, and as you were explaining, it made a lot of sense. That really he's redefining terms, and there's a belief that he has the right to. He believes that, and I don't know if followers consciously or unconsciously know exactly what's happening, but my question really was, in your view, what made the Republican Party the perfect place to develop Trumpism?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think it's worth noting that George Lakoff, the cognitive linguist that I drew heavily from, he's not a philosopher. He knows an awful lot about philosophy. The work he does is more empirical as a cognitive linguist. But it's important to note that he published his work in the mid-90s. So he had already seen this phenomenon taking shape in the Republican Party, or more specifically within the American conservative mindset. And I think it kind of ties back to the first question, that Trump is the perfect figure because he just made it all so explicit. So past Republican leaders haven't come right out and said, truth is what I say it is, or justice is what I say it is. But the seeds were ripe for that because of my word is authoritarian. That's not Lakoff's word. Because of the authoritarian strain already rampant within the strict father morality worldview, I think that makes American especially ripe for Trump and Trumpism being a manifestation of that worldview, with someone coming right out and saying justice is what I say it is, in so many words. So I think the my short answer to your excellent question is it's the authoritarianism that is a very important thread within the strict father morality worldview.
All right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next presentation. These are quick. But yeah, once again, for Dr. Nathan Hilbert, fantastic presentation, and thank you for the questions as well.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions, and I really enjoyed having this as an audience. Have a great conference.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, very kind of Nate to make time for us. He's got a busy day doing other things right now, so I was happy that we were able to get him in here. All right, so Yusha, would you like to introduce our first student presenter?
You can go ahead and do that, Professor. I sent you a message afterwards, and I don't think it delivered.
Okay. Well, I say that because it's your sister. Okay.
No,
so
we can skip her then. It's okay.
All right. So this is the first student presenter. She's from Dallas College. She featured recently in the town hall meeting. Did a fantastic job there, I might say. Her presentation is Customer Business Relativity and its Moral Impact. So exploring morality within the customer-business relationship. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody, Ezra Qureshi. I believe she's in the room. Hey, there she is. Welcome. You might be on mute.
Sure, you're still on mute.
I know. I was having some issues with the window. It has a mind of its own. Okay, are you guys seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Dang, I can't see it. Okay. Where to put it? Okay, cool. All right. Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Ezra Qureshi and I'm an international student at Richmond campus, Dallas College from Pakistan. I am majoring in business management and administration, and I will be transferring by the end of next semester. So I'm guessing this is probably my last conference that I get to be a part of. All right, so today I'll be discussing with you guys self-actualization and how it can help a business take social responsibilities and like practicing sustainable efforts or becoming more sustainable or encouraging others to be more sustainable by becoming role models, and how it can also encourage the general public and not only the consumer, but also the peers and others in the industry to follow suit as well. All right, so of course, those of us who are savvy with philosophy a little bit understand what I'm referring to in terms of self-actualization, but those of us who aren't, like myself, we can look at it from Maslow's point of view, because Maslow was a philosopher who shared a sort of a pyramid, a funny-looking pyramid that he described as the hierarchy of needs. The base would be the widest one, where the base have physiological needs, and the step above would be safety needs, then it would be belonging, love, and so on and so forth, until the highest part of it would be referred to as self-actualization. But what does that actually mean? Well, according to Saul McLeod, a psychology teaching assistant and a research developer at University of Manchester, self-actualization is actually the needs at the highest level, which refers to the realization of a person's potential, self-fulfillment. They're then seeking personal growth and peak experiences. And Maslow himself describes it as a desire to accomplish everything one can and become everything one can be. So this is a bit of a context, and in my opinion, this can be applied towards a business, because a business is treated as an individual. These, by the way, these references or this hierarchical need is referred to on human beings as individuals, not as anything else or not anything else conceptually, but I'm arguing or I'm presenting that it can be applied towards a business as well, because a business is treated as an individual under the law, eyes of the law, where it's an individual entity. The LLC is at least. Customers depend on the businesses to meet their needs, like people depend on each other to meet each other's needs. And people have expectation towards businesses, such as we would like better products, we'd like better services, we want this, we want that. And businesses form that role of fulfilling those needs of the people. In that regard, I argue that self-actualization is important towards businesses, and people don't realize that businesses need to first understand that the business itself has to fulfill their needs before meeting anyone else's. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the times we've seen people argue that, hey, you should be having more philanthropic things, you make so much money at the end of the year, or we have these expectations of Walmart or Google or YouTube or these Facebook or other giants in the industry, without completely understanding the structure of their needs. In terms that, for example, if somebody's making $1 million at the end of the year, we're only looking at that 1 million. We're not looking at the fact that it's possible that $900,000 is going into the expense that is required for the upkeep of the business, whereas the business is left with only $100,000 in their pocket, and then you're asking them to use that to benefit someone else when they need that to either perfect their own structures or their own procedures or anything else that's needed for the business to be able to survive. So having this expectation that, oh, you make so much money, you should be helping others, is an unrealistic one, especially towards the business, because we don't understand, as consumers and customers, we don't understand what's the requirement or what does the business need itself, at least from the customers, in terms of being able to survive or being able to perform at that level that we want them to. Secondly, I believe that businesses need to be willing to understand and undertake this self-imposed responsibility towards the people or the environment. You can't force a business to adopt to those. They have to make that own conscious, willing decision out of their own free will. We'd like, as consumers, we'd like the for-profit organizations to uphold their responsibilities and do the right thing, morally speaking. But we don't realize that these companies, like individuals, have to make that decision out of their own free will. We can't force it upon them and we can't impose it upon them. However, the crowd or the mob mentality forces these businesses to take those actions, in which many times they either end up failing or they end up disappointing a lot of people because people had these high expectations of them without understanding that is the business even at the level of self-actualization yet for them to be able to take care of others. Google is an example. Google has taken an active role towards sustainability as a tech giant and serves as a role model. Google wasn't always in this position, however. 5 to 10 years ago, if you would have told Google that, hey, you should probably do this, they would have not been able to do that at all because they wouldn't have had the capacity of doing so. They were still a new business. They were still creating and understanding business norms and all these other things that go along with the business that an average person or a consumer does not understand. And I believe nor do they need to. But the perspective of being able to know that, okay, is the business able to now, is the demand that I'm making towards the business even fair? Google also took that responsibility because it felt like it had that responsibility upon their shoulders as a role model and as a tech giant in the industry. They took it upon themselves to be the role model so that others in the industry could follow suit. And no surprise there, Toyota and I believe Nissan and a couple others immediately started following the trajectory Google was doing. So a little bit about Google was that the way they're practicing sustainability is that whatever equipment that would end up in the landfill, especially this Google, like tech or database chips and those kind of like physical plastic things or those huge electronic items, they would just buy it back at a lower price from the market in bulk, and they would just repurpose it, or they would kind of destroy it and create something new out of it so that they can keep up with the market and they can create a better, more efficient product. And the way Nissan and car companies are doing this is they're doing this with their batteries. They're not disposing it in landfills. They're donating or selling it off to people who are using battery units as a second life battery, in the sense that they're repurposing the use of it because the battery is still at 80% capacity, where it's no longer fit for a car, but it can be used as a storage electricity, or it can be repurposed towards a different kind of an electrical output that doesn't necessarily require the same energy as the car does. Bringing it back to my point, the only reason Google was able to do this is because it was able to take care of itself, and now it felt like it had the responsibility of doing that. Had Google not had that sentiment, I don't think Google would have been able to take those steps or initiate those things. As far as the initiative goes, like I said, once a business has self-actualized, they can then encourage others to take the initiative as well, including the customers who take pride in doing businesses with such organizations that are eco-conscious and who practice sustainability. The customers come into play where the businesses kind of mold the mindset of the customer and be like, yeah, this is an acceptable norm. This is a new trend. This is what you should be looking at if you want to keep up with everybody. And so collectively, that's how businesses influence the customers, and that's how they can influence individual decision-making. Very cool. All right, so what's the point of all of this? Well, my point is simple. As customers, we need to understand our role, and we need to understand that we can act as moderators between the companies who, according to our standards, are ethical, which may be smaller businesses whose products may not be as various as the tech giants or the giants in the industry like Walmart, but they're practicing more ethical practices, or they're more sustainable. We should be the moderators in deciding that who gets our dollars, and we should be the voice, using our dollars as a voice to tell the businesses that, hey, this is what we want you to practice, this is what we want you to do, and then we can't unrealistically expect a drastic change. There needs to be some sort of a buffer or some sort of a patience on our end as well. That instead of expecting a smaller or medium-sized business to perform at the same level as Walmart or Safeway or any other bigger company, would be foolish of us to be asking that output, because a business needs to have sufficient input for it to have effective output. In that case, we should be looking at, okay, are they able to perform in their immediate means as best as they can or not? That should be a better judge, or that should be a better indicator towards how a business is able to perform. So anyways, bringing it back to my point, we as consumers need to be the moderators of ethical or non-ethical practices, and we should be the ones who set standards by letting the businesses know that, hey, if you're not doing what we think is right, you're going to get out of business, or you probably won't have a customer base to be able to sell anything to. And now I believe I am open for questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir. That was a fantastic presentation. I mean, I'm prepared for questions, but are there any questions by students? Oh, I see Yusha's raising his hand.
Yes, go ahead.
Just, you mentioned that these companies, they have to be as large as the Google Corp to even start taking action of their, basically, they don't even start taking action. They need to acknowledge the fact that they're having a negative impact on the environment. But who is the body that is governing these? Because if you look at the Apple factories in China, how many tons of electronic waste they're creating and putting that junk back into the water bodies that naturally belong to China, and US doesn't interfere with that because according to the US laws, it's an offshore company. So who and how does this get monitored?
So no, I'm not making the argument that the companies need to be as large as Google. I'm saying that they need to first self-actualize, that they are in a position to be able to help others, or they are in such a position for them to be able to take such actions or become role models. They don't necessarily have to be as large as Google, because there are companies in Southern Dallas who have taken this initiative. Some of them are for profit, some of them are for nonprofit, and I'm speaking from the development point of view, where they've actually taken it as their mission to create more affordable housing in Southern Dallas, and they're not nearly as large as some of the other construction companies in the area. However, because they've self-actualized, or because they've willingly made that decision of being in the capacity of being able to help others, that's how they've made that decision that, okay, this is why I took that initiative, because I feel like I'm responsible as a company or as a business owner or as a business. As far as the regulatory things go, my discussion or my focus is not the regulation itself. My focus is how do we understand our dynamics as our power in terms of customers or in terms of consumers, that how do we allow those businesses to understand that, hey, this isn't something you should be doing right now. The trends have changed. Instead of them telling us what the trend is, we should be the one telling the businesses that, hey, this is our need. This is what I need you to do as a business or as a service provider. You need to kind of, fix yourself up if you still want my business.
So with that, then see why I brought this question up in the first place is because you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And according to reach the higher tier, you must accomplish the one at the bottom. So with that answer that you gave me, does Google have Google, Apple, Tesla, whatever, these bigger companies or corporations, do they have more needs than other companies, or just smaller companies
so. The bigger you are,
self-actualize much quicker?
Like I said, the business output depends on the effective input. So if you've scaled it out massively in terms of globally, then in that case, you need that massive input as well for you to be generating something of value, or for you to be generating a massive output. That's the business dynamics, or that's how typically businesses tend to work. Otherwise, they'd be going in loss, and they'd either have to cut corners, or they'd have to disregard everything what everyone else is saying and just do something to stay afloat, or do whatever they think is necessary for them to stay updated. I believe R. Young has a question, and then Abigail, and then Orlando.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, it's okay, but I just want to be mindful
Man.
of the time. That's what I'm saying. But yes, please ask questions.
Yes, I was going to say the same, Mr. If you can keep your answers just a little bit short.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No more questions, unfortunately. We got to move on to the next one. But listen, if you want to continue to engage any of the presenters, feel free to reach out to them in the chat, or they can send their contact info, or maybe you could have a little private conversation in the chat. That's totally acceptable. I just want to make sure that everybody gets their fair share to speak. But again, fantastic questions, fantastic presentation. And yeah, second time presenting at this conference. So it was great having you, Director. All right, so
thank you so much.
no problem. All right, so up next is Rivera Mukhandi. She has a presentation on African ethics.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Can you see my screen? You can. Okay, brilliant. Okay. So I am Rivera Mukhandi. A lot of my friends call me Ravi. That's easier to say. Today I'm going to be talking about African ethics. So a brief introduction to me. Again, I am Ravi Mukhandi. I'm part of Professor Manzi's philosophy class. I'm graduating next May, just like Ezra. And I am a self-proclaimed Pan-Africanist, lover of new ideas, lover of learning. Okay, so in my philosophy, we've explored a couple of theories, consequentialism, Kantian ethics, virtue ethics, the ethics of care, amongst others. So I'm going to start with what is ethics. I know a lot of you guys are philosophy gurus, but just so we can flow, I'm going to take the definition of ethics from the Webster's Dictionary, and it says ethics are the rules of behavior based on ideas about what is morally good and bad, an area of study that deals with ideas about what is good and bad behavior. A branch of philosophy dealing with, sorry, I'm blocked here, with what is morally right or wrong, a belief that something is very important. So really, my main idea as, I think a part of the background that I did not include in my introduction is I am an international student, I am Zimbabwean, I am an African. So whenever I come across new ideas about how people live and how people interact and what is important to different people, I always wonder about what the African context is. And so I thought it would be interesting to share some of those ideas with you. So the idea of this presentation really is to highlight other contributors to the field of ethics. We know about Kant and his theories, Aristotle and his theories, but there's been some more contribution that I would like to highlight in this presentation, and hopefully create some discourse around these other ideas at the end of my presentation. So particularly I'm focusing on African ideas around ethics. So some popular African ethics theories, if I could call it that: Ubuntu, Sika, Hunu, the Akan maxim. Okay. So this list is not exhaustive, and if you do have any that you'd like to add when I'm done, you're free to do so. But when I was looking at this, these were the main theories that came out as I was looking at African ethics. So some disclaimers. When I'm talking about African ethics, if I say African ethics, I'm not necessarily saying that it's shared everywhere in Africa. Like if you go through to all the countries in Africa, that's exactly what they believe. But I'm saying it's predominant. Another thing is, I'm not saying if it's an African theory, it means it's not present anywhere else, but it's more salient within the African context. Okay, so as an example, community, individualism, we are more communal in Africa. I'm not saying there's no one else who's not communal, but we understand it more in the African context. It's just who we are. So that's another disclaimer. Okay, so now to African ethics. The Akan maxim, it says humanity has no boundary. Hona Muni Nanoa. I could have butchered it because that's not my native, but anyway, humanity has no boundary. Humanity is of one kind. All humankind is one species with shared basic values, feelings, hopes, and desires. There's one universal family of mankind. A human being is valuable for the sake of them being a human being. Another maxim is, and another Akan maxim is, a human being's brother is, or being, sorry, a human being's brother is another human being. In other words, your brother is my brother, your sister is my sister. We're all together in it. A man's brother is man. Okay. So hospitality, so this, talking about that shared humanity, because the Akan maxim really, it's saying we have a shared humanity and you are valuable for the sake of being a human being. So you are a human being and you are valuable. Your brother is valuable, just like my brother is valuable. Your sister is valuable, just like my sister is valuable. And that's truly how Africans take it. Dougald Campbell took a tour of Africa in the early 1900s, and this is what he had to say. He said, hospitality is one of the most sacred and ancient Bantu land and is found everywhere. A native will give his best house and his evening meal to a guest without the slightest thought that he is doing anything extraordinary. This really does come from that Akan maxim. You are valuable for being a human being. So this is what Julius Nyerere had to say. Julius Nyerere was taken as one of the leading fathers of post-colonial Africa. So he had a voice, and up to now, a lot of people still regard him and his sayings as a leading voice. So he said one of the achievements of our African society was the universal hospitality on which they, members of the community and others, could rely. And really that comes from that Akan maxim, you are valuable for being a human being, just because you are. And I know we may be accused of suffering from speciesism. That word always gets me, but really for Africans, a human being is valuable. And that universal hospitality stems from that. So another Akan maxim is the human being is more beautiful than gold. That just shows the value that we place on human beings. No matter where you're from, we think you're valuable. Okay, so the next concept I want to talk about is Tsika Hunu and how we look at ethics as Africans. One of the things that I found very interesting as I was getting ready for this presentation is I was reading about what has been written about African ethics, but it was so close to home because this is truly how we live. So I speak Shona, and in the Shona language, Tsika means ethics, and the word is used interchangeably with another word, Hunu, which means character. Tsika means ethics, Hunu means character. So this ties in with the concept of personhood in the African context. A person, remember a person is Munu, so a person is munu in the Shona language, and hunu means character. What is inferred is that you lose your personhood, and I hope I'm not losing some of you, but munu, hunu, you lose your personhood if you do not display good character. So basically, the direct translation to say hauna hunu, you don't have good character, it means you are not a person. So the concept of a person in African thought embodies ethical presuppositions. Moral personhood in the African context. According to Ifeanyi Minketi, the various societies found in traditional Africa routinely accept this fact that personhood is the sort of thing which has to be attained, and it is attained in direct proportion as one participates in communal life through the discharge of various obligations defined by one's stations. It is the carrying out of these obligations that transforms one from the it status of early childhood, marked by an absence of moral function, into the person status of later years, marked by a widened maturity of ethical sense. And ethical maturity without personhood is conceived as eluding one. So really, the more you grow in moral character, the more you become a person. It's one and the same in an African context. So from an African viewpoint, good moral character and personhood cannot be separated. When we say hauna hunu, you don't have character, it's the same as saying you are not a munu, you are not a person. The two go hand in hand. Okay, so I've saved the best for last, and that is Ubuntu. Ubuntu characterizes Africa. If you ask any African about Ubuntu, they understand the spirit of the word, they understand what you mean. It really is what characterizes Africa. So I've saved the best for last, arguably the main tenet of African ethics. So without Ubuntu, there's no African ethics. Without Ubuntu, arguably, there's no Africanness. So what does Ubuntu mean? It means a person is a person through other persons, or I am because we are. Ubuntu is humanness, it is humanity towards others, it's social, and it's not individualistic. So Ubuntu, according to John Mbiti, who is considered the father of African theology, he's done a lot of work, a professor in Kenya. John Mbiti is considered the father of modern African theology, as I said. In giving a post-war analysis of African worldviews, he said, what is right people is wrong. For those who've looked at philosophy, in our class, we were looking at maxims and basically saying, how do you say this is right? It's right because of this and therefore that. They're saying what is right is what connects people together. What separates people is wrong. That is an African maxim. So I want to share some famous African proverbs about Ubuntu. The right arm washes the left arm. The left arm washes the right arm. In other words, you do something for me today, I do something for you tomorrow. The right arm needs the left arm. I don't know if I'm interchanging my hands, but anyway, we need each other. One arm cannot wash itself. Kandiro kanwe enda kunuva kamwe. So I interchanged those. I apologize. If you do good for me today, I'll do good for you tomorrow. In other words, the direct translation is the little plate will go to where it came from yesterday. So you bring me something today, I'll bring you something tomorrow, and that's how we live as people. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It takes a whole village to raise a child. And these are things that we truly, truly, truly believe as Africans. Remember my disclaimers from the beginning that I'm not necessarily saying that all countries in Africa are exactly like this, but it's predominant. And as an African, as a person who's had the privilege of hosting and being hosted by other Africans, I can truly say it's predominant within these proverbs and this way of thinking is predominant within an African context. Okay, I'm about to stop talking and boring you all. So Desmond Tutu from South Africa, who was an apartheid hero, he worked very hard within that space. He's still working within the church and still has quite a voice in Africa. He said this, he said, bringing people together is what I call Ubuntu. It means I am because we are. Far too often people think of themselves just as individuals separated from one another, whereas you are connected in what you do affects the whole world. When you do well, it spreads out. It is for the whole of humanity. This is according to Desmond Tutu, and I think it sums up the idea of Ubuntu beautifully. So if there ever was a maxim for African ethics, it would be this: an action is right just insofar as it is a way of living harmoniously or prizing communal relationships, ones in which people can identify with each other and exhibit solidarity with one another. Otherwise, an action is wrong. I got this from Thaddeus Smith. I'm not sure if you can read this, but I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. The difference between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one is only a matter of perspective. Pull the blinds, look around you. It is a weird and wonderful world. This is according to Bu Taplin. And I hope I managed to help you pull the blinds a little bit today and see how weird and wonderful the rest of the world is in ethics, in philosophy, in thinking, in maxims. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ravi. That was a wonderful presentation. Very informative and very interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take questions, but like I said, I strongly encourage all of the presenters to reach out with their contact info in the chat, and if anybody wants to engage them, again, that would be the time to do it. But thank you so much. That was wonderful.
I'd
yes.
like to say something quickly. Sorry, I'm not able to look the chat, so that's why I'm raising my hand.
I can change that for you. You need
Yeah.
like 30 seconds.
Please. Thank you.
You're welcome. The
All right,
same
yeah.
goes for everyone.
All right, folks. Well, yeah, I think our next presenter is Rachel Young. Rachel Young comes to us from Austin College, and her presentation is Consensual Deception, a Kantian moral exception to lying. Very intriguing title. I appreciate the rhetorical question here, and I'm excited for this. So yeah, everybody, Rachel Young.
Hi, y'all. I'm Rachel Young from Austin College. I'm a senior and a triple major in philosophy, English, and anthropology. And today I'm going to talk to you about consensual deception, right? Which is what I'm going to argue a Kantian moral exception to lying. So our boy Kant maintains that to be truthful in all declarations is a sacred, unconditional command of reasoning and thus cannot be limited by any expediency. But in the long tradition of Kantian scholars, I'm going to be like, I don't know if I agree with you, Kant, and deploy the principle of humanity in a way that differs, alternatively asserting that it is permissible to obscure the truth within select medical situations, so long as it is the patient and not the physician spearheading this deception.
Oh, you're on mute, Rachel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Is it moving pages for y'all? Whatever. Okay, why does Kant think lying is morally impermissible?
There we go. Now it's moving.
Awesome. Kant's insistence that to lie is never permissible stems from a specific understanding of the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative is the central tenet of Kantian ethics. It is a moral rule measuring the intentions of an actor, not the outcome of a scenario, and it must be upheld in every circumstance unless you want to be irrational. So to Kant offers like 3 different versions of it, but for this paper, we're going to talk about the principle of humanity, which says that one ought to act so that you always treat the humanity in a person, whether in yourself or another, always at the same time as an end and never merely as a means. This entails respecting the rationality and autonomy of all individuals, which he refers to as humanity, by refusing to meddle in their affairs and by helping them to achieve their goals, although Kant is notoriously vague as to the extent of help expected. It is from this command to not meddle that Kant derives the immorality of deception. In order to treat someone's humanity as an end, you can neither meddle by preventing them from achieving their goals nor interfere with their ability to choose a goal for themselves. One example of this kind of interference is lying, here understood as intentionally displaying misinformation or obscuring information with the intent to deceive. Often this withheld or obscured information is necessary for another to rationally determine their goals. Since Kant considers humanity itself to be an objective end, meaning that it has unconditional value and thus should be prioritized over all other considerations, and not meddling is a provision required to meet this end, it follows that lying, which is a kind of meddling, is never permissible because it undermines the objective end of humanity. This logic is reasserted when Kant evaluates the maxim/principle behind lying to determine if it lives up to this command of reason, and concludes that a world wherein lying is universal is paradoxical. Lies are defined in opposition to the expectation of truth. If no one tells the truth, lying loses its saliency because one's words hold no weight. So the weakness of this position lies within this assumption that lying always constitutes meddling and the lack of constraints on a universalized maxim that promotes lying. By examining specific circumstances within the medical field, it's possible to tailor a maxim promoting deception that Kantians can accept within the constraints of the principle of humanity. So let me situate ourselves in the literature/discussion on lying in the medical ethics. So the moral validity of deception within the medical sphere is widely debated, with both the extremes of lying being never morally necessary and never morally permissible, lying being morally necessary and never morally permissible, having their defenders, albeit a limited sample. Collins' article, Should Doctors Tell the Truth, and Hicks' piece on telling patients the truth narrate several anecdotes and hypothetical situations wherein lying might arguably be permissible. Although they have varying opinions as to how convincing the arguments made to advocate the moral permissibility of these scenarios actually are. A majority of the circumstances narrated therein depend upon consequentialist frameworks to validate the moral legitimacy of deception, and thus are incompatible with Kantian ideals that emphasize intention. Upon reflection, though, both authors implicitly offer a scenario that seems to be an exception to this rule. Occasionally, they note, patients do not want the truth about their maladies. It is in just such a circumstance that Kantian scholars might find a foothold to argue that it is permissible to lie to a rationally autonomous agent who accurately self-assesses that they are incapable of processing the true implications of their diagnosis at this time without becoming overwhelmed and possibly self-destructive. Collins offers an example of one such individual, a man with locomotor axia, who asked neither the nature nor the probable outcome of the disease, silently begging ignorance. Collins validates this decision by the outcomes it evokes, but in noting his patient's intentional choice not to seek further clarification, there is a hint of the Kantian. Information is withheld here out of respect for the patient's desire not to know the extent of their circumstances. From this scenario, we can develop this universalized maxim. Healthcare professionals should deceive their patients by obscuring the truth of their condition in order to respect their rational ability to accurately self-assess what's best for their mental and emotional welfare whenever the patients indicate verbally or non-verbally that they would prefer not to know the truth of their condition in whole or in part. Lying in such an instance would not only be permissible, but required by the principle of humanity. Normally, treating someone as an end would prelude the option of lying, since lying typically undermines one's ability to choose a goal for themselves. It's difficult to know the right path when you're missing a large part of the equation, right? Needed to rationally determine your goal. Here, though, the goal of the agent presumably holds is to lie to themselves. So forcing an unwanted truth onto them ultimately prevents them from achieving that goal and causes you to meddle, which is always wrong. There is a world of difference between not knowing and choosing not to know. The deliberate nature of the second is a rational choice made in favor of one's emotive self-preservation. Furthermore, the maximum requires not only the passive acceptance of a patient's goal of self-deception, but the active support of that goal. In order to respect an agent's, my dog. In order to respect a patient's agency, physicians need to be sensitive to the desires of their patients. So let me preemptively object to everything I've just said. So let's start with one objection that might arise. Is this actually violates the implicit command to not meddle with others by allowing the physicians to play telepath. Healthcare professionals are only human after all, and thus are fallible. This maxim leaves it up to the observing doctor to correctly interpret the oft-times nonverbal desires of their patients. Mistakes will inevitably be made, and as Higgs points out, this kind of consistent, unwanted dishonesty undermines the faith patients have in the medical industry by chipping away at the autonomy that they are afforded within this field, which of course violates the principle of humanity. That noted, I think that even Higgs, who ultimately argues against any lying in the healthcare profession because he believes that it undermines trust and effectively weakens the system as a whole, advocates for the kind of sensitivity and care in determining how much the patient wants to know that this maxim demands. Deliberately lying to a patient out of some concept of paternalism is an obvious infringement upon their humanity, as it obscures all the information they require to effectively formulate a rational decision. But this exception is not an instance of a doctor proclaiming, "I know best." In fact, under the specific circumstances of this maxim, the physician in question is deferring to the judgment of the patient, allowing them to set the parameters of how much information they've determined they can handle at this stage in their treatment. This is not always indicated verbally. Communication is far more nuanced than simple proclamations. While there are signs that a patient would prefer to remain unaware of the severity of their diagnosis, that the sensitive and attentive doctor can use as clues, that's not to say that there will never be mistakes made, but Kantians are not really concerned with the consequences. What matters here is the intention in consenting to assist in this deception is respecting and upholding the goals of the patient. The second a patient verbalizes their desire for the truth, regardless of their nonverbal tics, this maxim is no longer applicable, as the circumstances of the scenario no longer meet its specific requirements. It is the patient, not the physician, that ultimately decides whether deception is an acceptable course of action. Another objection that might arise is that arguably it is illogical for the patient to want to deceive themselves, and thus desiring deception reveals that the patient is not a rationally autonomous individual. Certainly, it's feasible that choosing to deceive oneself indicates a compromised rational facility, and if so, this self-deception can only compound that lack of mental integrity, further distancing the individual in question from total personhood as it is understood by Kant. One who advances this opinion would say that the failure of its subjects to meet the requirements of personhood disqualifies this maxim from consideration. The categorical imperative only applies to rationally autonomous agents, after all. So a maxim that seemingly applies only to the irrational cannot be measured against this standard determinist morality. And at first glance, it does seem irrational to willingly deceive oneself. Unlike Kant, though, who broadly believes that lying is always in opposition to the objective end of humanity, this argument does not equate truth, at least when understood as honesty with the self rather than externally, with the objective end of humanity, instead understanding it as a subjective end. It has a conditional value. Thus, there are moments when other considerations, such as one's mental and emotional well-being, override it. For example, individuals often repress particularly traumatizing events, such as rape or torture, voluntarily, or otherwise as a way to protect themselves and allow themselves the space to continue living. The full extent of one's poor health and the implications surrounding it do not factor into every decision. Often knowing the worst and living with it like a guillotine always poised to strike can even arrest one's ability for rational decision-making in the day-to-day. Prioritizing one's mental health is a shrewd choice here, as it preserves an individual's ability to continue making decisions at all. The conceit of accurate self-assessment of one's emotional and mental welfare was deliberately included in the maxim to account for this value judgment. For when you understand honesty with the self about traumatic or otherwise Emotionally taxing circumstances is just one of the many subjective ends that can be prioritized or deprioritized depending on whether or not it serves an agent's broader goals. Self-deception becomes a rational choice. So in the case of physician-assisted self-deception as a method towards self-preservation, it can be said that it is very least arguable that Kantian scholars can defend the moral validity of lying. Of course, Kantian scholarship is not a monolith, and I might have failed to note some glaring irregularity in this maxim that would undermine the very foundations of the hypothetical argument constructed here. But as it stands, I feel pretty good about this. So, questions?
Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation, Rachel Young. Thank you. Unfortunately, no time for questions in this sense, but yeah, I mean, you're getting plenty of questions in the chat, and please feel free to respond to them all. Yeah, what a thought-provoking presentation. I appreciated that. All right, great. So this brings us to our next presenter. Abigail Long is presenting on equality throughout the animal kingdom. So yeah, everybody, Abigail Long.
Hi, everybody. Alrighty, my essay is particularly, it's not very long, it's fairly concise. So here we go. Does a mute person who does not know sign language have rights? Does a mentally impaired person have rights? Most people would probably say yes. So why are the rights of animals a controversy? Some people argue that they are not smart enough to be granted rights, and others argue that they cannot feel pain. Many people claim that the benefits animals provide to humans provide sufficient reason for us to treat and use animals in whatever way we see fit. What constitutes the ethical treatment of animals has long been a subject of debate in philosophy. We have so many different theories and arguments against treating animals poorly that it can be a little mind-boggling at times. In this essay, I will be discussing a few of the philosophical theories that debate why animals should be treated with equality. Today I wasn't done with that page. In his article, All Animals Are Equal, philosopher Peter Singer argues that the ability to feel pain and pleasure is the only factor that matters when treating animals as equals. Singer notes that two significant ways humans inflict pain on animals are through the consumption of meat and animal testing. Consuming meat is a tradition practiced around the globe, but it has become so common in some places that it is less a matter of tradition and more a matter of convenience. Not only do humans unthinkingly eat meat, but they often do so without realizing they are supporting the often cruel practices and industries that put it on their table. Experimentation on animals is another cause of their pain. Humans use animals for testing everything from life-saving medicines to cosmetics. Animal testing is often excused because of its many benefits to humans. But according to Singer, it is forgotten that every time an experiment is carried out on an animal instead of a human, it shows preference towards human lives and the lives and well-being of animals. The practices of consuming meat and experimenting on animals go directly against an idea Peter Singer proposes called equality of consideration. Equality of consideration argues that animals' interests must be equally considered along with human interests. However, Singer makes a distinction in this argument by saying that equality of consideration does not mean that animals and humans have the same rights, but rather each group receives rights equal according to their capabilities. For instance, equality of consideration would not claim that both chickens and animals need to be taught to read and write. Reading and writing is a skill that can be taught to humans, but it makes no sense to guarantee that right to chickens as they can't read or write. Similarly, a right guaranteeing humans and chickens are protected from having their beaks cut off makes much sense for chickens and little sense for humans, as humans have no beaks. Mark Bittman, in his article entitled Some Animals Are More Equal Than Others, argues that animal equality extends beyond equality with just humans to include equality problems between different categories of animals, specifically pets and farm animals. According to Bittman, an animal kept as a pet is protected and even given certain rights such as protection from being kicked, beaten, or tortured without reason or in a cruel manner, while farm animals, on the other hand, can be practically tortured. Bittman names several of the grotesque grotesque actions practiced on farm animals, including the grinding of unweeded male chicks and skinning animals alive. Raising farm animals for their meat in conditions such as these is depicted by Bittman to be a terrible way to get meat. It is comparable to a hypothetical organ farm created by one Tyler Doggett. In his article for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy titled Moral Veganism, Doggett says, it would not be morally permissible to create humans on organ farms and harvest those organs, justifying this with the claim that these humans wouldn't exist if it weren't for the plants to take their organs, and so part of the deal is that these humans are killed for their organs. Such a farm would surely be a sight to behold, but in a way it already exists. Just replace every reference to humans with the word animals and every reference to organs with the word meat. The distinction between pets and animals is an unfortunate double standard for the treatment of animals, and one that I am just now becoming aware of. I applaud Mark Bittman for bringing this inequality to light. Though his article is intensely negative and supported with extreme examples, it is obvious that Bittman is driven to right wrongs and stop the injustices against farm animals. His passion has earned my hearty applause, and he's convinced me that inequality exists between pets and animals. Similarly, I applaud Peter Singer's article on equality between humans and animals. His piece showcased a remarkable amount of thought and reasoning. Singer took the time to close loopholes and solidify every point with much research, not to mention how easily he displayed his remarkable grasp of knowledge on the topic. As a novice in human-animal equality, I look forward to reading more of his work. Animal equality, or the lack thereof, has been a subject of debate for a long time, and it is sure to be debated in the years to come. Only two forms of equality have been discussed in this essay: the lack of equality between pets and farm animals, and the idea of equality between humans and animals based on the ability to feel pain. While these are by no means the only forms of equality concerning animals, they are perhaps two of the most important forms. These ideas have shown me that inequality exists beyond humanity's borders of race and sex. More than ever, injustices against equality need to be looked for and discussed instead of ignored or dismissed. It may be challenging, but any changes we need to make need to be lasting, and it is hard to make lasting societal changes without a proper knowledge of equality.
All right, thank you, Abigail. Yeah, wonderful presentation. And yeah, we've got a few minutes for questions. I've got a question, but first I want to turn it over to the students. Anybody have any questions? Oh yeah, by the way, just to reiterate, if you have questions for the presenters, put an exclamation mark in the chat, and whoever sort of goes first becomes a queue. And yeah, I'll be able to direct the questions to the presenters that way. And if you can't have access to the chat for whatever reason, hit the little hand raise button, or do what Isra's doing and just raise your hand. All right. Wait. Okay. Let's hear from Rachel first, and then we'll turn to Isra. Yeah.
Hi. I loved your argument. I'm a vegan myself, so I feel you. But I wanted to ask if you think that there's maybe a hierarchy of suffering between just physical suffering and emotional suffering, and would that make the suffering of humanity more morally significant?
That is a great question, and that is another thing that I should research more into. As I said before, I'm a philosophy novice. In a way, kind of connecting to Ezra's mentioning of self-actualization and Maslow's pyramid of needs, there does seem to me to be a hierarchy of sorts. I think one's physical safety would come to be of more importance than their emotional safety. However, there are instances where emotional safety can, or lack thereof, can lead to, what's the word that I'm looking for? A lack of physical protection, whether that be suicidal thoughts or thoughts of self-harm. It can just be degenerative and not at all positive. So Yes and no. It's a hierarchy of sorts, but there's a lot of interplay, I would say, between hierarchies.
All right, thank you. And then, Isra, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I don't know if I could. Okay, so the question I had was, it's a beautiful argument that you've made, and I feel like the topic needs more discussion because I don't think it's discussed enough. Because I'm an animal lover myself. I'm not a vegan, but I do love animals and I do stand against animal cruelty. So I appreciate the question Rachel asked regarding hierarchy of emotional or physical pain. But my question is, how would the pain be articulated in the fact that we as humans barely understand each other's pain, even though we can physically say that, hey, that hurts, or we could describe the level of on a scale of 1 to 10, that's how I've reacted or whatever. How do you do that to an animal whose language we don't understand or whose behavioral aspects we don't know enough about, in terms of how do we measure their pain for us to be able to make that judgment or an assessment that, hey, that might be really hurting them, so we should probably cut that out, or we should probably not do this thing to the animal because it looks like it's in a lot of pain?
Also, a really great question, and I 100% agree with you. This topic needs to be delved into more, and it was a short report, and anyway, so that is a hard question to answer. I think animals can show us that they have pain. They can, at the very least, they have similar reactions to pain as humans have, meaning that they can whimper, or they can snarl, or they can just, there's a variety of different ways that they have shown themselves to have pain. So I do think that they do feel pain. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the rest of your question. Can you remind me of it?
Yeah, the simple question was like, from a moral standpoint, that humans can articulate their pain in words, animals can't. So how can we actually assess it properly that, hey, that animal might be on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be suffering as a 1, or it might be suffering as a 10. And based off, because our assessment of what's ethical and non-ethical is based off of that scale. But if we're not able to understand or define the scale properly, how are we able to say that, yeah, that's fair, that's not fair to the animal?
Well, in a way, I think that humans would have to, I don't think it can be categorized on a scale of 1 to 10. I simply don't think that that there's the possibility of them being able to describe it in ways, obviously not verbal ways, but describe it in different ways and on a scale of 1 to 10. But I think that animals can, when dealing with the treatment of animals, I feel humans need to look at themselves and ask themselves if they would want to be in a similar position to what the animals are going through. Like many of, I believe it was Bittman's article that mentioned chickens being all stuck together in cages, small cages where they can hardly move around. There's little room for movement. And I think if that was done to humans, that would not stand very long, or at least it shouldn't stand. And I think we have to kind of look within ourselves and see, in a way, how we like to be treated. Treat others the way you would like to be treated.
All right, well, thank you very much for that presentation, Abigail. Thanks for the questions, Rachel and Isra. And yeah, that brings us to our next presenter. Our next presenter is the Philosophy Club president, Dallas College Philosophy Club president, student president, of course. I mean, present company accepted. It's Ferdinando J. Castro Gonzalez. This presentation is one of 3 that he'll be leading today. First one is called "It is Your Role, Gender Equality and Equal Inclusion for a More Sustainable World." Yeah, and I'll turn it over to Ferdinando.
Thank you so much for it and for specifying any title, even though it's not needed. Thank you. Yes, well, first of all, I have so many windows open out here that I'm not completely sure if I'm sharing the right one. So I may need your input out here. I'm gonna throw one. Hopefully it doesn't have anything indecent. Because I want to start my presentation with a video. So are you looking at something similar to YouTube? I'm gonna need a yes, otherwise I can't really
Yes.
see you right now.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna put this. Oh wait, you know what? I'm not sharing the voice. That's rookie mistake 101. Okay, let's go again, guys. I hope I'm not losing you. Ba ba da ba ba. Da 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 da. By the way, excellent. Everything. I'm not asking questions because we don't have too much questions. That's all. I don't want you to feel like I'm rude. I'm not. I mean, sometimes. All right. Now, yes, it's proper. I'm going to start with this video. Let's listen to that and then I will speak. Are you listening or no?
Gender inequality doesn't make sense on any level. By marginalizing the rights of women, we deny ourselves the opportunity to lift millions of men, women, and children out of poverty, not to mention the chance of a just and fair world. From birth, girls and boys, women and men are expected by society to play certain roles and behave in certain ways based on traditions, religion, and other beliefs. These behaviors are learned and shape the gender norms in a society. Unfortunately, in many countries, gender norms create disadvantages for women. Often, girls are not sent to school. When they become women, they then have limited ability to earn money or realize their potential. Rural women play a major role in agricultural development. However, in many developing countries, women cannot formally own land. Without land, they cannot get loans to invest in their farms or businesses. This also means they have no control over the use of land or the benefits that come from it. Men generally control the household decisions, like how to use the family's assets. These disadvantages are often reinforced by practices that limit women's access to services, like training. Cultural beliefs can also restrict women's opportunities, such as in parts of Zambia where women cannot paddle their boats as it is considered bad omen. The result of these issues? Women remain poor and agricultural production cannot reach its potential, perpetuating poverty and hunger in the developing world. The social norms that limit women's opportunities need to be understood and then changed. By taking a gender transformative approach, we can influence social norms and bridge the gaps in access to resources and services between men and women in a lasting manner. Change is needed on many levels, and both men and women must be involved for it to happen. Research and development organizations need to invest in programs that promote gender equality alongside improving productivity and incomes. Policies need to be implemented that increase women's access to services and resources. Communities need to support women as farmers and as leaders. Increasing women's voice and agency is a valuable end in its own right. When development organizations, policies, and communities support the success of women, we have a chance to reduce extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity for girls and boys, women and men around the world.
We can't hear you for some reason.
Sorry, thank you so much for pointing that out. I was doing a pun, so I laughed with myself, but we don't have time for it. Okay, anyways, well, I hope this video serves as a little way of what I'm trying to speak. I have a big presentation, but I'm gonna try to keep it as short as I possibly can. Okay, so again, my name is Ferdinando Castro Gonzalez. I am an international student at Dallas College, Richland campus, raised and born from Caracas, Venezuela. I am truly honored to be invited to be speaking here in the conference. To speak more about this topic that is quite passionate for me, gender equality. Since at a young age, I witnessed how several companies and communities diminish my mother's talent and efforts based solely on her gender. A woman without a man seemed to be someone not worthy of consideration. It hurt me beyond description, not only because of the injustice that represents, but because I saw that my mom was used to it. For her, it was the norm, and she accepted it without much complaint. This feeling started to grow more into a rage when, as an adolescent, I was asked to start incorporating some of these practices because that's what men do. Refusing to follow the norm, I commenced understanding that gender inequality does not affect only women. Men are also subjected to these social contracts that our society developed. I was labeled as gay, unfit for relationship, or just plain weird for the simple act of believing that women should be treated as equal. But I will continue working hard to promote a better and fairer treatment for all individuals as a whole. This subject is not limited to male and females, as I mentioned. It is an issue that affects everyone disregarding your age. These inequalities are expressed differently, depending on your cultural background and the gender role in your society. Why should we aim to achieve this goal? Because by addressing it, we should see a significant decrease in domestic violence. It will promote economic prosperity where individuals enjoy better health and safety, and it will produce a greater sense of communion where participants enjoy a better form of living. Gender equality, as defined by the UNICEF, is when equal rights and opportunities for human beings help all people fulfill their potential. Sadly, despite this topic's relevance in today's society, I continuously observe how the term gender equality is vaguely used and significantly misrepresented. The terminology is not one that fits just a particular group, but all groups. Gender equality is a movement that seeks for all people, women and men, to have access to the same rights. It pushes for a society where your gender identity do not determine whether you will be protected by the law or not, and where we all have access to the same resources. If we think about it, the benefit that comes from achieving this goal will last for many generations to come, since our generations will count on a more stable community, where the resources are better distributed and opportunities are granted fairly. As UNICEF stated, gender equality is critical for all children to have a fair chance in life. I do not think that there is a need for me to point out how far we are from this ideal world. As I mentioned it earlier, not only do we have ways to go, but we are all affected differently. Let's start with the children. The gender stereotype affects their perception of themselves. According to the children's societies, 44% of girls said that being good looking is the most important for them, while 1 of 8 boys believe that being tough is the most important trait. Our society is heavily focused on creating apparent differences among each other than working on uniting us. We needed to sectorize our tasks to ensure as a species survivability, but that time is over. Those practices are not required anymore, and it's time to update. These gender stereotypes are forcing us to create a persona so we can fit in. And sometimes the implication of fitting in is to let ourselves be held by lower standards of living than others based on uncontrollable and sometimes even unreasonable facts. We all have experienced gender discrimination, so we all know how it feels and how damaging it can be. It is in our best interest to create a more inclusive society where gender does not subject our dreams. Based on an assessment that the Australian government performed, countries with unequal societies are more likely to have higher rates of antisocial behaviors and violence. Conversely, those who embrace gender equality enjoy healthier and safer communities. The European Institute for Gender Equality realized a study on how reducing gender inequalities in sectors such as STEM education, labor market activity, and payment could impact their economy. They conclude that, based on the modeling, improving gender equality will largely positively affect the GDP per capita. These positive results will happen to increase productivity and the improvement on the economic's potential productive capacity. It has been overall harder for women to be reasonably included in our society. Allowing them to have equal chances will increase their potential, which will help us obtain other sustainable development goals. One important consideration that explains the hardships to inequality is the misrepresentation of women and minority groups on leadership positions, include but not limited to governmental functions and companies. This misrepresentation on leadership positions happened because of overall unconscious bias towards them, being in leadership positions and for the lack of fair recruitment practices. It is a subject to be concerned because we have kids watching and growing. We believe they cannot hold certain positions due to their skin color or gender orientation, to name just one example. Just like that, we are coercing their ambitions in life and subjugating them to seek less that they may deserve. Our current system is installing blocks that are not helping the majority of us and are stalling our economy. We have great individuals with fantastic ideas. It should be considered a priority to focus on their development because they will lead the future. It should be our best interest to invest in a better legacy. We have the power to start creating a better future today. And as the UN explains, gender equality is more than a fundamental human right. It is a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. The equal inclusion for females and minority groups on the education, workforce, and country's decision will propel our effort for a more sustainable society where our communities will enjoy a better life prospect and a fairer resource distribution. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Fernando. All right, I think we might have time for one question. And again, just we got Dr. Tim Burns from St. Thomas University would like to weigh in on something. But yeah, just so everybody knows, again, throw the exclamation point down there, and that's how you're able to pose a question.
Sure. I mean, it's just 1 minute for the next presentation, so I guess I can just chat.
Yeah,
So-
let's hear. Well, here, I think Tim has a question. Dr. Burns.
Well, I was going to defer to the students, but Ferdinando, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you. As I was listening, I was trying to come up with objections, and it's really difficult. So I was wondering if you can think of any. Like, what do you think is the best argument against what you've given us today?
I mean, but when you say best argument, it implies that there is a good argument. Can it be just a bad one?
Well, I think that, like, ideally, every argument has some
I have a proposition.
Okay,
that's the
Dr.
most
Tim.
reasonable.
I'm going to say something, and I'm sorry that I interject you, Chef. It's just for a matter of time. I'm going to say something. I hope that it makes sense for you. But I feel like part of why we have these inequalities is just based on like prehistoric ideas where men were like supposed to go and hunt, where like the girls were staying because, you know, they are the one who has the babies and had it maybe to take care of them so they don't get like eaten while the people are looking for something to eat. So I mean, like, I think that they separated us for a bit and then it just kind of like stood like that. For me, it makes no sense anymore. Does that kind of help in your question?
You shut him down. All right, y'all. Well, we do have to kind of move on. Again, thank you very much, Fernando. You'll be hearing more from Fernando later on this afternoon, and as well as in the Philosophy Club. All right, but our next presenter.
Wait. I'll just chime in for Tim. For the counter argument I was going to propose for Ferdinando was that from the time of late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was one of her earlier cases. It was Moritz versus Commissioner. And if you want to read up on it or if you want to email me about it, I can tell you more because it is a case that I have studied quite in detail. And that was the precedent that men are superior to women, which was, of course, later proven otherwise. So if you want to have a on that, I'm just going to leave my email in the chat.
I think he has your email. Oh, for everybody else, I see. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, yeah, thank you, Dr. Burns. Again, Dr. Burns teaches philosophy at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And our presenter up next is also a student at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is Lizan Hasnain, and the presentation is called, "Is It Rational to Believe in God?" Again, I like these presentations with the question.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. So if you just give me 1 minute, I will just share my screen and unmute again.
I feel tempted to do like jokes in the meantime, like, but I'm
saying
this person. Yeah.
And again, like I said, please feel free to continue any conversations with previous presenters in the chat. That is more than acceptable. Okay, here we go.
You're still muted, Lisan.
Mute microphone.
So can everyone see my screen and everything and hear me properly? I just want to make sure.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you
Mute
so much.
microphone button. Microsoft PowerPoint. PowerPoint slideshow.
So as you said, my topic is about, is it rational to believe in God? So we'll move to the next slide.
Slide 2, introduction.
So I guess the purpose of this presentation will be to prove that belief in God is rational. I guess obvious over there. Just quickly, I'll just talk about the components of this presentation. So I'll first, to lay the groundwork, I'll talk about the proof of God's existence. Then I'll talk about some evidence that, the actual belief itself is rational. And then I'll mention some counter arguments because they're really interesting ones, I think. And then put in my own say on the matter, and then we can conclude the presentation.
Slide 3, proof of God's existence.
So we'll go to the actual proofs now. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different proofs of existence of God. So the first one that I think is really interesting is that human beings have this innate ability to recognize that there's a higher power with their own senses. Sorry. So and to back this up, I have a card from Just Impaired from Yaqeen Institute, which is a source for Islamic research, and he says that human beings sense the existence of God, or what they perceive as a higher power, by pure instinct, with or without a prophetic revelation to guide them. Expressions of the senses divinities have appeared in cultures and religions all over the world, despite them being widely separated by time, geography, and language. So he's saying that, I guess it relates to how people think that, oh, I think there's something out there, but I don't know what it is. So there's that innate curiosity as well. And so moving to the next thing is that, the next point is that existence, must come from somewhere or something. So in the source Divine Link, the argument of dependency, the author, Hamza Zorges, provides an analogy involving dominoes. So in short, so as we see you would see like a set of dominoes fall on one on top of the other on top of the other, and you would, obviously, one person seeing that, they'd be curious, like, oh, how did this happen, or how did that happen? So basically, the argument of dependency is saying is that everything in this universe is dependent on something else, but we can't say that a universe is dependent on another universe, as Hamza also writes. And so then I have another interesting piece from Hamza as well. So he asks, like, could the universe and everything that we perceive exist eternally and dependent on themselves? This is not a rational explanation. The universe and all the things that we perceive do not necessarily exist. They could not have existed. They also have limited physical qualities. Since they could not give rise to their own limitations, something external must have impose these limitations on them. So now, taking that into effect, like, if there's every effect has to have, it's this whole thing about every effect, in my opinion, has to have a cause, and so that external cause must have been God, is what the interpretation is. So in other words, everything is created by something, and that original creator, must be God. And so we will there are some another piece of this argument over here. So going back to the analogy of the dominoes, it may seem that one domino depends on another to fall, but the reason these dominoes fall in the first place, as you know, is because of an external independent force. So now with all that, so I guess I created this small little argument, and I'll ask for your feedback on it in the end. If this independent external force exists, then God must exist. That was my own conclusion. So now moving onward to the next slide.
Slide 4, counter-arguments.
So now we'll go to the counter-arguments side. And a lot of these counter-arguments have been sort of designed by science. So one really big common argument that I'll be talking about here. There's several here, but I'll just be touching upon a couple of them. So one common argument is that there's simply not enough evidence to prove God's existence. So my response to this is that there's a huge problem over here, and that is that the argument is only looking to humanize and objectify God's existence, right? So God is something that is beyond, is an entity that's beyond our comprehension. It's not, it's a separate, God is a separate being. That's what I'd like to argue over here. And I feel that science fails to realize that particular fact. And then there's another argument, or counter-argument rather, that says that science is simply more superior to the belief in God or religion or whatever you want to call it. And so Stephen Hawking is an example of someone who argues this very fact. He says that and I'll just read you a quote from his the book that he wrote called Brief Answers to the Big Questions. I'm sure most of you have heard of this one. It's pretty interesting what he writes. So he says, nowadays, science provides better and more consistent answers, but people will always cling to religion or cling to belief because it gives comfort, and they do not trust or understand science. So as you can see over there, Hawking just believes that religion is something that's phony, and that's that's just there to give people hope. But as you will see later on, I will say that I will use you should keep this hope and hope in God as in the back of your mind, because I'll come back to it later on. So Hawking is saying that this belief in God is simply inferior because science has more quote-unquote definitive answers to the world's problems, right? Like you've heard the phrase, science can solve all the world's problems. So they don't trust the science. This statement is simply invalid because, number one, I can, on a side note, number one, I know some scientists in my own family who are physically believers in God as well, but also there you can still believe in science and believe in God at the same time. It's not like there's this whole clash between this is better than one thing, and you see that with a lot of different things, not just between science and belief in God. So it doesn't you can't really it doesn't make sense to compare the two, because belief is one thing and science is another thing. And then another thing is it's not really fair, is it, to go and invalidate all the other people's experiences, right? If you're saying that people are just simply clinging to religion, there's no that's only a one-sided viewpoint, and it's not really factually proven. And one last point about the science is that it can't explain every piece of the universe, because the universe is, who knows, probably the universe is still growing, and changing and moving forward. But that's not to say we cannot. With all this said, we can't. It's not to say that we should not appreciate the advances of science and what it's doing for our world. And then I will just briefly touch upon this last one. It's the problem of evil. I'm sure it's widely known in philosophy. So it's which says that if a God exists, then evil should not exist. Oh, sorry. So if God exists, then evil should not exist. However, if there is even some amount of evil in the world, then God cannot exist. So this very one, black and white viewpoint of, okay, it's either there or it's not there. But not to go too much into the theological viewpoint, but we are the creation. So I personally saying that I don't think we have the because as I said before, God is a different being, and so we can't comprehend. So what right do we have to as the creation let's just say that was created, for the sake of argument, was created by this God, right? What right do we have to challenge that power that we can't comprehend? And I will move on to the next slide.
Slide 5. Belief in God is rational.
So this is where I will make my case that, in fact, belief in God is rational. Whether it's convincing or not will be up to you. So those of us, I'd like to make the point in the beginning that for us that have been born into a religion are sort of taught in and sort of grow up in that sort of belief system, whether it's Islam, Christianity, whatever the religion, and we're taught to believe that we're taught to believe that a God exists, but we don't really question it, right? Or it's for some people it's like it's like, okay, God, I believe God exists, or I believe God doesn't exist, but that's not the point over here. The question, the tough question comes when we're trying to figure out, okay, is it really logical to believe in such a being? So it's in my case, I would say it's very difficult to raise sort of concrete reasons as to why it's rational to believe in God, my own take on this is that I feel that belief in God can give people hope. So when people are at a loss and they have nowhere else to turn to, right? Like if they're searching for the end until the ends of this physical world, right? What else do they have? So then it is in that sense it's also perfectly rational to turn to God. That's one reason. That's one reason science can't where science can't help you, right? If you have a problem that you want to solve and it's beyond science, then can you turn to science? No. I'm not saying that it's and then I also bring up the point that I'm not saying that it's sufficient to blindly believe in God. I think just blindly believing in a creator without understanding that is where the belief becomes irrational. So to reiterate, I'm saying there's nothing unreasonable about humbling, oneself and turning to a higher creation for this, quote unquote guidance. So now we will
slide 6, conclusion.
Go to the conclusion part. So, we as human beings have free will. So as I said before in the previous slide, if you remember, that it's up to you to create, make your own conclusion as to rational belief. So in short, as my arguments above, has stated, belief in God is rational because it gives us hope and allows us to go beyond science to understand ourselves. And it's as I said, up to ourselves to decide whether belief in God is rational. And with that,
Slide 7, citations.
this last slide is just my citations and my resources. If you want, I can send you guys the slides and you can take a look at these resources if you want, because they're really interesting. And with that, we have reached the end of our presentation. And I'd like to thank Professor Burns, actually. He's actually my philosophy professor this semester. And this topic was actually suggested by him for one of our sort of, exams. And so we as students created our own answers and evidences for that question. So thanks, Professor, and thank you for encouraging me to participate in this platform.
All right, thank you very much, Lizan. That was a fantastic and very thought-provoking presentation. And yes, shout out to Professor Tim Burns. Again, teaches philosophy at the University of St. Thomas, where Lizan attends, and not just a colleague, but one of my very closest friends. So glad that he was here. All right, folks, this brings us from rational belief in God. What is human evolution? So our next presenter, what is human evolution? And also, just to reiterate, again, please leave your questions in the chat. And of course, the presenters are free to respond to them, or the presenters can leave their own information, contact information in the chat for extended conversation. I think that would be excellent. But okay, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Hi, Professor. I couldn't put my my PowerPoint, but I sent it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't working. I was trying to put it in, but it wasn't.
All right. So let me check on it and I can share it.
Yes.
Exclamation mark. Sure. Give me 1 second. Ooh. All right. So just give me a second. It's downloading.
Sorry.
No, don't you worry. It is all right. It's all right, man. Have this.
It's okay, I got it.
Hamilton.
It's okay, I got it. I beat you
I
to
already
it.
have it. I was just sharing it.
It's okay, Mr. President.
Why the titles? I never asked anybody.
Can y'all see it? Just let me know when to move.
Yeah, we can.
Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Who knows?
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. All right. So the next slide. Yeah. So so this is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck from 1744 to 1829. He actually started the evolution of the animals, how they started. So basically, though the name Lamarck is associated with the discredited view of evolution, the French biologist nation that organs inherit the traits acquired through their parents' lifetime had common sense on its side. In fact, the inheritance of acquired characters continue to support well into the 20th century. The next slide. Yeah, the next slide. Sorry. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck is one of the best-known early evolutionists. Species don't die out of extinction, Lamarck claimed. Instead, they changed into their other species. For example, organisms exist alongside complex advanced animals today. Lamarck thought they must be continuously created by expansionist generations. Like believe that things evolved in upward direction from dead matter through simple to more complex form towards human perfection. According to Lamarck, organisms alter their behavior to response to the behavior change. They change behavior in turn modify their organs and offsprings from those improved textures. For example, giraffes. What's the next slide? For example, giraffes develop their long necks, front legs by generations of browsing high tree leaves. The exercise of stretching up to the leaves alter the neck and legs, and their offsprings inherited these characteristics. According to Darwin's theory, giraffes that happen to have slightly longer necks and limbs would have better chance of securing food, thus be able to have more offsprings. Conversely, Lamarck's view, texture of organ would shrink and disappear if less or not used at all. Driven by these modifications, all organisms would become adapted to their environment as those environments change. Unlike Darwin, Lamarck held that evolution that has constant process of striving towards greater complicity and perfection, even though this belief eventually gave away Darwin's theory and natural selection acting on random variation. Lamarck is credited by helping put evolution on the map and acknowledging that the environment plays in the role of shaping the species that live in it. And the next slide. All right, this is Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882. He's most credited for this. Next slide. He became a naturalist, biologist, and geologist who widely contributed to the science of evolution. He came up with the idea of one species changing to another over time. He noticed that individual members within a species vary from one another. Next slide. The theory of the evolution by natural selection. He speculated about how natural selection would cause a land animal to turn into a whale. As a hypothetical example, Darwin used North American black bears, which were known to catch insects by swimming in the water with their mouth open. I could see no difficulty in the race of bears being rendered by natural selection more aquatic in their structure and habits with larger and larger mouth, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale. Next slide. So that was his voyage for like about 3 to 5 years, where he went around to see every different animal. Next slide. Darwin's voyage in 1831, he signed up to sail on the HMS Beagle as a naturalist. Darwin spent 3 years in a different parts of South Africa collecting specimens, and then headed to the Galapagos Island. He also visited New Zealand, Tahiti, Australia, Mauritius, South Africa, and the Atlantic during his voyage. In 1838, Darwin came up with the idea of one species changing to another over time. He noticed that individual members within the species vary from one another. He also observed that all living organisms compete with each other for survival. So I think that's, what was the next slide? I think that's it. Yeah, I think that was all my presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Jenny. Appreciate that. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes for questions. And of course, I'll turn it over to the students. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, I mean, I'm ready for a question. With a question. All right, so Jenny, thank you so much for that. And it's really interesting to hear, again, Lisan's presentation followed by your own. Oh, Yusha has a question. Go ahead, Yusha.
Thank you for that, Professor. I guess my question would be that you mentioned according to Darwin, a land bear would turn into a whale because that's how they used to hunt. So what had evolved the creature to exist in that species or in that premise in the first place? And if that is the case, that the bear evolved from something else into a bear, then why do in current times we still have these pretty stupid creatures like pandas, where most of them fall and die?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think because where they live, their habitat depending, and I feel like one stayed in one place and the others move on, and that's how they created, I feel. And I think, yeah, one was left, so.
All right, interesting. We got a comment here from Orlando, one of the Philosophy Club student officers. Genetic succession is based on environments and evolution is gradual. I'd love to hear some elaboration.
But what was the question?
I think he was trying to make a distinction between genetic succession based on environment and evolution is gradual.
Yeah,
I do.
because he called them some dumb pandas. That's a bit rude, man. I take offense to that.
Exactly.
I identify as a panda. That's messed up. No, but I mean, what I'm saying here is basically, in terms of what makes a species succeed is dependent on their environment. So if the panda's succession does not involve any type of intellectual cognitive function, then obviously it's not going to become more intelligent over time. And also, we can't necessarily observe it in the long span of time because it's so gradual.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah. So,
yeah. Pardon me?
I was talking to Yusha. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I think that's debatable because they changed over time. So when they are, how do you say it? Never mind. Well, I can't. No, never mind.
No, I mean, I think you're onto something there, Jenny. Because at the same time, yes, the change is gradual, but in retrospect, one is able to recognize the change maybe in future generations. So just because a change is gradual doesn't mean it's not observable. Mm-hmm. Especially as technology advances, we can identify changes on a very gradual molecular level. And so it allows us to anticipate future evolutions, future generational changes, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right, cool. All right, well, time for the next one. Thank you so much, Jenny, and thanks for the questions, y'all. And then, you shall remind you about animal equality later. But okay, so our next presenter is Priscilla. She is presenting on ethics and subjectivism. So, yeah, very excited for that. Yeah, take it away.
Good morning. I could not make a PowerPoint presentation because my computer doesn't permit me to make those. I've tried to use Word and several Microsoft applications, but it doesn't let me. So I'll have to read my presentation from the computer.
That's fine.
Okay, so I will be presenting ethical relativism or subjectivism. And this is defined as the belief that there are no objective moral standards. It stands to say that morality is subjective to societal standards and values, and also tries to draw a line between the variations in morality and practices across various cultures. It states that what is right or wrong is determined or subjective to what a person's view is at that point in time. So that way, one person might seem wrong to another, but in another person's point of view, the person might be doing the right thing. An article by David Brooks gives an insight into why he believes that we need no objective moral code. He starts by stating various statistical values that give the gradual divergence in behavioral patterns by parents. He also goes ahead to quote research done by Robert Putnam, giving various scenarios of what they gathered from visiting different families in various social classes. Brooks states that the first response to those cases would be sympathy, but goes on to say that sympathy is not enough. He goes on to say that the health of a society is determined by their habits and virtues of its citizens. He says that there is a lack of basic codes and rules in daily life, and the need to add these norms back into the society would improve the standards of living. He identifies the next two steps as holding people responsible and then holding everybody responsible for what happens in this society, rather than being self-indulgent. According to the Internet Encyclopedia of Psychology, relativism is sometimes identified as a thesis that all points of view are equally valued. Ethical subjectivism is a theory that states that moral judgments are actions that follow the way they perceive or feel about that said concept. J.L. Mackie argues against the existence of objective moral codes. He does this by explaining concepts for his error theory, the view that all positive claims are mistaken. He goes ahead to explain that he believes all moral thought and talk is based on false assumptions, and expands on his topic by explaining that the statement that values are objective does not envelope morality. It envelopes other things that could be loosely termed as morality and just as aesthetically pleasing. He then goes ahead to state that the only reason objective moral codes have some force is that they are referred to as reflections of our ways of life, instead of being seriously called inadequate and badly distorted views of said values. He states that the only reason people judge something as good or as bad is because they would cause a problem or would not be accepted, but because it triggered a certain kind of reaction or response. Brooke argues that objective subjectivism is wrong because he believes that society needs to implement values and norms that would improve the standards of living of members in that said society. This perception of his is based on the negative effect of ethical subjectivism in that society faces today. The arguments for and against ethical objectivisms are ones that have striking outtakes on life. Moral relativism was not taken highly until the modern era. For example, in anthropology, it sometimes connotes, among other things, the rather uncontroversial notion that anthropologists should strive to be impartial and unprejudiced in their empirical inquiries. However, in moral philosophy, relativism is usually taken to suggest an empirical or metaethical or normative position. Mackie's argument is that the reality behind having positive moral claims. His error theory explains why he perceives morality and how people only attach right or wrong to ideas if it doesn't sit right with them. His argument explains that intuition is a description of what supplies our basic moral judgments than reason. Whereas Brooks' argument reminds us that the members of society values are necessary and mandatory. His examples from various scenarios in families are to show what moral decadence has done to the society because of moral relativism, and that there is no way to completely conclude for our society as it is, because both sides contain extremists who would overexert their ideas and force their beliefs on others. Hold on. And that is all I have for my presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
If you have any questions, I could send you a copy of my essay so you could all see it. Is that okay?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you can even, if it's possible, share it in the chat. I'm not sure if that's a possibility. Or yeah, you can share contact info. You do have a question posed to you.
Where's the question?
Yes, so it's in the chat. So I'll read Rachel's question here.
Yeah.
To build off the discussion you've started here, does the globalized morality offered by the institution? Oh, I'm sorry. That's actually a question for you, Chef.
Okay.
It does apply to me. But I have a question for you, if nobody else does. Oh, perfect. Thanks. You're able to share it. Excellent. So let me ask you this. Subjectivism and ethics, and ethics is based upon the understanding that...
I'm sorry. I have a 3-year-old sister.
I guess I'll ask you. Mackie believes that our definition of right...
Oh, please. Hello. Oh my goodness. Vicky, I'm busy. Go. Yes, sir.
Are you kicking them out?
Huh?
You don't have to kick them out.
She's noisy. She's gone now.
Okay. Well, yeah. Just a quick question, because again, I like this idea of ethical subjectivism, kind of as you're laying it out here, and I can't help but wonder a little bit, because again, for somebody like Mackie, notions of right and wrong are very much a response to the environment in such a way where when new innovations arise, when new phenomena occur in the world, in one's life, in one's experiences, one is then compelled to reassess what were known as objective standards and sort of change the very idea of objectivity to better fit the phenomenon. So it's kind of like we can have objective morality, but it's an objective morality that is very much, I guess, blossoming from the context of actual concrete experience. So do you think that's still a good definition of sort of objective, unchanging truth? If the truth about truth is that it changes?
Honestly, Mackie's point of view is not really something I can stand with, but I know it's something that exists. People judge you based on what they feel is right or wrong, and they assess you on what they previously viewed. You can't expect someone that has seen that a particular thing is scary and sees you do it and you expect the person not to think that something's wrong with you. So the fact that there is objective truth is true, but I don't believe it's a system one should stand by, because at the end of the day, if someone believes, okay, let's say a scenario, someone believes pedophilia is right, and we all know pedophilia is wrong, would you stand to say that because of his objective truth, in a sense, that person is right and is permitted to do something?
Yeah, no, I like that response.
I just feel that, yes, everyone is given the right to have their opinion, but in specific cases, that opinion might definitely not count, because it will do more harm than good.
Yeah, okay. And so, so here's kind of an example, building off of what you're saying. So let's say you want to, I don't know, you want to enter a pie contest. Who can make the greatest blueberry pie? And that's like a contest you want to enter into. So in order to have a contest, you need judges. You need people who are able to measure the success of a good pie. But then that begs the question, well, what are the objective standards for what makes a good blueberry pie a good blueberry pie? You might say how it looks. You might say how it tastes. The ingredients in there, if they're healthy ingredients or not so much. So these are objective standards that one can use when judging a blueberry pie in a pie contest. But of course, if somebody develops, I don't know, somebody comes up with some sort of like blueberry pie mist and says, no, this is a blueberry pie. You might think, I've never known a blueberry pie to even be like that anymore. And then the person says, well, this kind of blueberry pie actually gives you vitamins and minerals that makes you healthier. And so with that brand new phenomenon, with that brand new version of a blueberry pie, now the judges have to reevaluate their standards. So what was once an objective standard of you know, this makes a good blueberry pie, that makes a good blueberry pie, suddenly those standards themselves have to change, but then they have to be accepted as the standards with the understanding that, well, if we encounter something new, we have to change what we take our objective opinions to be. So I think it's that kind of thing. I mean, you know, I'm using kind of a facetious example, but that seems to be sort of what your argument's kind of getting at, especially as you bring Mackey into it. And I appreciate that. Did that make sense, for example? I don't know if it.
Yes, it did. Thank you, sir.
No problem. I mean, maybe, for example, you want to judge blueberry pies by saying, well, they smash in the face really well because you're a clown and you want to use blueberry pies not to eat, but to use as props in your comedy act. So that's another way to think of it that isn't necessarily foreign to the phenomenon. It just hadn't yet been considered. Okay, cool.
Thank you, sir.
All right, well, that brings up our next presenter here. And thank you again, Priscilla. And of course, I'm continuing to reiterate, please feel free to throw an exclamation point in the chat. And if you do, that is an indication that you'd like to pose a question to the presenter. And of course, you're encouraged to carry on conversations in the chat with previous presenters. But okay, our next presenter, Jocelyn Cano, the mind-body problem. So yeah, Jocelyn, if you're in the room, I'm turning it over to you. Is she in the room? Let me check. Yeah, she's there. Jocelyn, you might be on mute.
Okay, what about now?
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, I was just trying to use headphones. I was trying to use my phone, that didn't work, and I tried to use headphones, and I thought that would work. Okay, so as I was saying, first and foremost, I just want to say like a huge good job to everyone that has presented. You've done awesome. I'm not at all a philosophy guru, so most of this information has been very new to me, and I've been able to take like bits of information in. And also I want to say like good luck to everyone else that's going to present, because it's a bit nerve-wracking being up here, although like we're virtual, you know? So my name's Jocelyn Cano, and today I will be reading an essay about the mind-body problem. I find this problem confusing, and the objective of my essay is to simplify it as much as possible. So without further ado, I will go ahead and read my essay. So, known as the mind-body problem, that has several minds baffled. It is such a challenging question that we still don't have an exact answer to. However, there exist two sensible theories that attempt to explain the mystifying issue of the mind and body. One being materialism, which addresses the issue merely on physical terms, and the other being dualism, which attempts to explain that the mind and the body are two distinct entities. As mentioned above, the mind-body problem is a complex problem that not even the most intelligent minds can give an exact response to. This issue involves identifying a bond between the intangible mind and the tangible body. When speaking of the mind, we're not referring to the actual brain, but rather the consciousness within each of us. Therefore, it is important to remember that as I read along. In fact, our consciousness helps us be aware of our surroundings. Moreover, it is where all our mental events and functions take place in privacy. Out of this simple yet difficult question, other forms of questions formulate, like what happens to the consciousness after death, and is the mind an actual piece of matter? It all began with the famous philosopher by the name of René Descartes, a dualist. He became one of the first to analyze the thread that binds our body and mind together. Philosophers looked at this matter from different degrees, which ultimately influenced their theories. However, to have a good understanding of this issue and why one wins over the other, I should explain a bit of both sides. René Descartes, the man behind dualism, wrote that, quote, "The body is physical while the mind is not physical," end quote. In addition to that, it is also believed that both can exist without the other. Therefore, they are different. However, at this time, Descartes couldn't precisely explain how a non-physical mind could interact with a physical body and believed it just somehow happened. Problems from philosophy questions, how come when we're babies, we don't actually have a mind, and then all of a sudden we did? If you think about it, it is quite strange that this invisible cloud suddenly appears in us. This argument is referred to as problem of radical emergence. Later on, Descartes came out and thought the bond between the mind and the body was believed to be held by the pineal gland. Quote, "Although the soul is joined to the whole body, there is yet in the body a certain part in which it seems to exercise its functions more specifically than in all others. I seem to find evidence that the part of the body in which the soul exercises its functions immediately is solely the innermost part of the brain, namely a certain very small gland," end quote. Furthermore, he described the body as physical facts because they are observable, while the mind is described as mental facts because they cannot be seen. As noted above, although there is not an indisputable response to the mind-body issue, there are two strong theories that have addressed the problem. However, only one of them seems to best possibly fit, and that is materialism. This thought of notion claims, quote, "We have no ghostly non-physical parts," end quote. Moreover, this idea attempts to explain the matter of the mind and body on purely physical terms. The idea of materialism is made up of behaviorism, mind-body identity theory, and functionalism. Behaviorism simply attempts to explain our mental states through our behaviors, whereas the mind-brain identity theory believes that our very minds are just our brains. In other words, this theory believes that mental states are identical to brain states, just like H2O is identical to water. A well-known doctor by the name of Wilder Penfield discovered a remarkable part of the brain while operating on his epileptic patients. He uncovered the part of the brain that was responsible for experience. Quote, "Thus, his patients were fully conscious. Penfield would use an electric probe to stimulate their brains, and the patients would report what they were experiencing," end quote. While on the operating table, his patients would say they were at a train station or hearing music, but this was quite strange considering that no one else in the room was experiencing that too. This causes us to say that mental events are neurological. In other words, for us to undergo experiences, it must pass through a series of neural levels. This idea completely dismisses the notion of a ghostly substance. However, dualism believes that the mind and the body are two different substances, both independent of one another. This is known as the conceivability argument for dualism, but this can't be true because the split case above proved to us that the mind is the brain. In addition, it explains how mental events can cause physical events and vice versa. The idea of functionalism suggests that mental states are functional states. In other words, it is a state that receives an input and puts out an output. For instance, let's say I'm walking barefoot, and without watching where I'm going, I step on some Legos. Ouch. I stepped on a Lego that stimulated pain, and my pain receptors then sent messages to my neurons that allowed me to react. Therefore, functionalism helps us identify, quote, "whatever physical feature of a system serves the appropriate function within the system," end quote. However, this led researchers to believe that the mind is much like our digital devices. Quote, "The relationship between body and mind," it is said, "is like a relation between hardware and software." But functionalism does not value physical composition and only values how it operates. Quote, "Our minds happen to be embodied in our brains, but there is no essential connection between the mind and the brain. Any computer with the right program would also have a mind," end quote. With that said, many wonder whether technological devices like our computers are worthy of consciousness. At first thought, it sounds like a foolish question, but not when you consider that functionalism only values how it functions. Long ago, it was believed that machines could obtain consciousness if they were programmed to act like normal human beings. The Turing test was conducted to find whether a computer could act like a human after going through multiple trials. The exam began by asking a human and a machine a question and then analyzing their answers. The purpose of the experiment is to see whether a machine could act like a human being and pass the test. However, none have passed the test, although some have come close. Yet, that doesn't dismiss the idea that a machine can't have like a consciousness. The more technological advancements we make, the closer we are to confronting the issue. One popular question that arises from the mind-body issue revolves around death, as in what happens to us after we die. If the majority of people believe they survive after death, then they believe, quote, that the new memories and habits which continue a person will continue to be exhibited in a new set of occurrences, end quote. However, as nice as it sounds, no one knows for certain what will occur. Now back to materialism, this idea denies the existence of any God or any soul, resulting in the dismissal of an afterlife. However, it is hard to believe, quote, the universe has been shaped and is governed by an intelligent purpose, and that it would be unintelligent having made man to let him perish, end quote. If we bring up the possibility of a supernatural being, we have to dismiss that idea too because it is not physical but rather ghostly. The mind-body problem may seem a bit fizzy, however, I believe it challenges the reader to seriously think of a matter they've never considered. The issue mainly wants to address the complex relationship between the mind and the body. Remember that materialism refers to science to answer these issues instead of ignoring scientific facts. However, this essay serves to help the readers decide for themselves if materialism or dualism seems like a valid theory to them. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, we have 5 minutes for questions. Anybody want to use a question?
I don't know if I'm prepared for questions. I did.
Okay, that was a really well put essay, and I really liked it, really enjoyed it. So thank you for that. But basically, my question is: do you think that dualism? Okay, I heard myself. I think someone has me. I can hear myself.
Oh, it's because I'm using the sound from my computer, so you'll be able to hear yourself. I don't have any headphones. Probably that's it. I don't know.
Gotcha. So basically, my question is: do you think dualism and materialism can kind of overlap? Because from my understanding of dualism is that reality kind of lies within the mind and our concept of reality, essentially. And so within materialism, I guess you could kind of make the claim, well, isn't the only thing that's real essentially our sensations of the brain? So in that sense, couldn't you say that there's sort of an agreement there?
I mean, I can see that. I can see that happening, how there may be a connection between the two theories.
Because the way I see it is like dualism, or materialism is more maybe just an informed form of dualism.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else? And if not, I've got one.
Oh dear. I was completely unprepared for questions. Like, when I started watching this, like, I noticed like at the end of people's presentations, like they were asking questions, and then I was like, I was not ready for that.
Okay, I mean, mine. My question, I think, is it's more of like asking you to elaborate on something. So, essentially, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll ask you your opinion on functionalism. Do you agree with the critique of functionalism that you described, or do you feel as though functionalism might be more defendable than, I don't know, perhaps is led on?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know. I was really unprepared for questions. I don't really like functionalism, actually.
Okay, well, why not?
Fair enough.
I think it's a bit like vague when you look at like when you look at like the explanations of like behaviorism and the mind brain identity theory. Like I feel like functionalism is a bit weak in between those three. I don't know, that's just me.
Okay. Fernando, did you want to say something?
Yes, I mean, not as a question. It's just like I always encourage people whenever we're doing this type of events to not feel like you're unprepared or anything. That's one of the beautiful things of philosophy, that you do it every day, every second of your life, even when you don't realize it. So you might be very well prepared for any question we may have. And this is just another way for you to feel more comfortable about your knowledge. I guarantee you we're not going to be asking you throughout questions of how we can make you look bad in it. This is not our intention. We're just trying to challenge you a little bit more so you can continue exploring these areas as much as you can, okay? And this is for everyone. Right, that's all.
All right, cool. So I guess I'll throw one more thing out there. So again, I agree with you. I'll be honest. I like your take on functionalism. I do find it flimsy. But I will say this: there was a time when it was considered to be pretty compelling, pretty thought-provoking, and it kind of goes back to some earlier presentations we've heard in some ways, where it's like, certain organisms, certain aspects of things seem to be serving one particular role almost naturally, almost in such a way where they couldn't do anything. I'm kind of putting it sort of straightforward here. And so, I mean, if you've ever thought of something like, well, this can only function in one way, or if you've ever said to yourself, why am I malfunctioning? Something along these lines, it seems to suggest that maybe it's possible to believe in this kind of sense of functionalism as, again, rooted in our nature, rooted in the way that we're able to perceive the world. It seems like, as flimsy as it probably is, there is reasons for entertaining it, right? So, I can't use my eyes to hear, for example. I can't see myself listen. So, I mean, you could argue that, well, perhaps certain things do serve certain functions and no other function. But it kind of goes back to that last presentation when Priscilla was talking about Mackey. This idea of, well, what if somebody else who has a different experience with these kinds of things can come in and introduce new, innovative ways of having things function? Now, that's kind of, I'm sort of extrapolating here, but yeah, just for the sake of defending functionalism, which I never thought I'd ever do. All right, thank you so much, Jocelyn. Again, that was a very well delivered presentation, very well thought out presentation, and yeah, glad to have you.
Thank you.
All right, cool. So that brings us to okay, so a different kind of presentation. This is going to be a nice sort of poetic oasis among a litany of scholarly, I suppose, presentations of all different fashions. So up next is Emily Jones. Emily Jones presented poetry at our last conference, and I thought she did a fantastic job. So I personally invited her back to present another original poem, and she accepted. And so this poem is called Frankenstein's Boy. And so after she delivers the poem, we could maybe perhaps discuss how it hits us. I do believe it's philosophically resonant, so yeah, I'm excited for that. Emily, are you in the room? Let me see.
Yeah. Am I at a good volume right now?
Yes.
All right. Hello.
Hey.
Let's see. Yes, I'll be presenting Frankenstein's Boy. I consider it pretty psychological. It has, in my opinion, interpretive themes of dissociation, loss of identity, or disconnected relationships along those lines, pretty much. Let's see, I'll pull it up. All right. Okay, so Frankenstein's Boy. My name is Conrad Hart. I have dark hair and blue eyes. My voice is baritone and I am 5'9". In a town called Fairfax, I am a foster child to a man named Dr. Shepard. Other boys, too, were fostered by him, but he had stated to me that I was different. Yes, I was different. By junior year, I was first violin and orchestra, a musical engineer. a workhorse for every note in each piece, an activity that could put me at ease. In these sounds I built my world attentively. Every sign is arranged on the paper in the instrument. And here I begin my sentiments. I had my dearest friend, Lily. I can feel the way she talked to me, so loving and considerately. And I would act harsh sometimes, disconnecting, but I never meant these careless things. She was the only person who mattered to me. We would meet after school once a week and discuss whatever worth mentioning. When she had questioned my guardian, my detached doctor attached to me, I described the places he's been, traveling and working, his eccentric habits and hobbies, including his obsession with human anatomy. And then neither of us made a sound, until Lily spoke with her eyes down. She had said, Dr. Shepard seemed strange. I didn't know what to say, every sign was arranged. During winter, cold and harsh, I had called Lily to make amends from an argument. Without Shepard's consent, I wanted to make things right, and so I walked out into the black night. I was crossing the old bridge. I could hear the bells ring across the snow. She asked me what else happened that night. I wouldn't know. The last thing I could remember was the doctor taking off my clothes. This is not my body, he locked me in a cell. He said he saved me from dying, but now I'm living in hell. When he trapped my soul in this empty shell, I became an operating toy. I am not myself, I am Frankenstein's boy. He snatched my body like a body snatcher. He hacked my body like a sheep for slaughter. Without my say, without my consent, every sign disarranged like a man who pretends to be God. 2 years it took to get used to the way I look and move. A surreal nightmare. My mind was displaced somewhere. Like your body is numb and you can't feel it moving. Scars on my head and muscles sore. My bones too long, my blood like a corpse. My nerves are strained all the time, as if my head's not always there. Some wires disconnected, broken beyond repair. And where did you find this body? What other secrets does he bury? When I suddenly cry, is it me or him? I cannot stomach these grim feelings. I had almost graduated, I was almost gone. An existential displacement, he wiped away all my achievements. Ruptured sounds, my world of sound came crashing down. My fingers are not the same, I cannot play the violin. Did he not displace my soul? Is this not a sin? But what is crueler than taking a friend? I can never see my friend Lily again. She was somewhere out of my life. If I could only hear her, I'd feel almost fine. My body would stop shaking, it would ease my mind, like hearing my music again, a piece with every note aligned. I saw her once while standing outside, but how could I talk with a face unrecognized? I never got to say goodbye. I wanted to hug her one more time. There was something I wanted to say. I wished I prayed for her to stay, but she went away so far, far away, further than my mind to my eyes, and here I suffer with my doctor's lies. Standing in the mirror, I do not know the boy in front of me. I shut my eyes. All I have are my memories. My name is Conrad Hart. I have dark hair and blue eyes. My voice is baritone and I am 5'9". You take whatever, but my soul is mine. Sometimes it feels like it's all in my head. My soul feels empty when I'm in bed. The world commits another sick crime. Sometimes I dream I'm in my old body, and it's like I'm dying every time. All right, that's it.
All right, thank you, Emily. Yeah,
No
very,
problem.
very evocative imagery. So could you sort of pull out the significance of the title? Maybe make it more explicit and sort of relate it to these psychological themes that you described earlier?
Well, as far as obviously the literary reference to Frankenstein, I've always thought of, let's see, kind of like, so it's supposed to be implied, but he kind of dies and the foster father takes over and switches his body to someone else's. So it's implied, well, in the book, Frankenstein's the doctor, which some people might not know. He's not the actual monster. And I thought of Frankenstein's boy as like the doctor is he adopts this boy, but the narrator Conrad, he doesn't feel like himself anymore. He becomes Frankenstein's boy instead.
Yeah, and I think that gets at the existential element. I mean, this is of a piece with the philosophy club topic later today of personal identity formation. And so I guess I'll ask you this: do you think that in some ways, part of getting older and deciding for yourself, sort of who you are and how to make yourself, you kind of become both Frankenstein and the monster? Do you think that's a fair relation?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's what's kind of tearing him apart in the poem, is feeling like he isn't becoming like more of himself. He's becoming something else, and it's I would say really tragic in his circumstance.
Yeah, and so is there a solution, I suppose, to this? Not to say your poem poses some sort of like mathematical problem, but in so far, yeah.
No, I get what you're saying, because it does sound like his life's over, even though he just has a new body, a new self. So I think it has to do with him letting go of what he thought his life was, and taking what he has now and learning how to live with it.
Yeah. I mean, here's maybe a real psychological question, but are all of our parents and guardians somehow Frankenstein?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. I feel like, a lot of people debate saying the real monster in the book is the doctor. So I feel like I wouldn't say parents hopefully aren't like Frankenstein really, but I don't know. In a nice way, they're Frankenstein if they're creating you, but not in the evil way.
Yeah, because it seems like, okay, I like your response, because it kind of seems like, in order for the monster to have been created, there had to be scars involved. There had to be sort of forcing the materials to come together.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but wonder if that's not like what it is to perhaps raise somebody. Not to say that all children are monsters. That's not what I'm saying. Please don't think that. But yeah, this idea of again, it's not a perfect process, and sometimes, when children begin to develop their own awareness, they might be somehow resentful or, questioning at least of how they've become who they are at the time. And, there's a real question of the amount of awareness that the monster has in Frankenstein. And I see some relation to that and, developing. Oh, the comments are really blowing up here. Okay, cool.
I agree with what you said, by the way.
Yeah. And can we make that analogy, extend it to teachers and students? No, we don't have to go down that road. All right. Okay. Yeah, we still have 2 more minutes left. Cool. Let's look at some of these comments here.
Wait, I had my hand up. That's not fair.
Yeah, no, I was ignoring you. Please.
To answer, kind of to touch up on the question that you brought up, whether parents are the Frankenstein monster, I would say to some extent, whether good or bad, that is up to each person to identify. But to some extent, parents can be Frankenstein, because at the end of the day, to either better their child or worsen them, parents instill some of their qualities into the child, whether they know about it or not. Like in one of our previous meetings, philosophy club meetings, Orlando and I were discussing that, for example, if a parent is alcoholic, he would instill one of 2 things into his offspring. The first one being the child becomes an alcoholic, or the second being the child becomes so, I guess, negative towards alcohol that they completely negate even the medical or any sorts of benefits that alcohol offers. So I would say to some extent, yeah, parents and teachers, yes, I'm looking at you, Menzi, they are Frankenstein monsters, because you and I are the perfect examples. And I give this example almost every meeting, that when I first took Professor Menzi's class in spring 2019, I had no interest in philosophy, right? And now I find myself as an officer of the philosophy club, working alongside with the esteemed Professor Menzi.
Emily, I think you would agree.
In other words, you're a monster, man.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I like the comparison of parents and with this poem. I mean, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, do you all recall the motivation behind Frankenstein creating the monster? I mean, you know, you can interpret different things, but
He wanted to, didn't he bring the dead body parts to see if he could create man again from death in a science endeavor?
Yes, he was seeking immortality.
Oh, I get you. Oh, yeah, my bad. That was the main thing. That was the whole idea.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we're both right. The yearning for immortality through sort of scientific advancements, and then seeing how it doesn't necessarily go well. I mean, an ancient understanding of parenting is that, you know, you're seeking to sort of continue on with the legacy through genetic lineage, through a miniature version of you. And so it's fascinating to see, you know, the monster and then Frankenstein, how they're different, but then maybe a deeper reading shows that perhaps they're not. And no matter what you create, be it artificial, be it more biological, it always is going to bear your imprint. But of course, if you create something that prevents consciousness, it might grow to challenge its own origin.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. The whole challenging between, because the one thing I like about the poem is when he talks about his body and saying without his consent. I think of it that way, as applied to what you just said. Like whether he had his permission to take over, but he also sneaks out that one night and says he went without his consent, without the doctor's, and he took his body without Conrad's consent. And it's just that kind of obligation or not obligation to your child or parent relationship is interesting too.
Yeah.
To the poem.
Another I think comparison could be to the influence that maybe one's significant other has in forming part of oneself, or reforming or deforming oneself. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But yeah, I mean, fantastic poem. I really appreciated it. And yeah, thanks for coming back and presenting again. Emily Jones.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you all.
All right, and the next presenter here, Pleasant, she's writing on aesthetics. So a nice little segue here. It's called Music Through the Lens of Mimesis and Existentialism. Yes, Pleasant was a student in my aesthetics learning community last spring. And so mimesis means imitation. If you hear the word mime or pantomime, it comes from the Greek word mimesis. So imitation and existentialism. Let me see, is Pleasant in the room? Is Pleasant present?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking about music through the lens of mimesis and existentialism. And like Professor Menzi just said, mimesis is a term used in philosophy, a Greek word which means imitation or representation. And so Plato and Aristotle talk about this in two quite interesting and contrasting views, but definitely agree on one thing, which is art being an imitation. So Plato's very popular, which I assume most of y'all know, is of the example of a chair being made by a carpenter, which explains how it's an imitation of the thought by the carpenter. I'm sorry, I'm going to be reading, so you're going to hear pages turn. So the chair is made by the carpenter, which means it's an imitation of the idea. And so comes a painting, which is only an imitation of the chair. So making it at 3 removes of reality. So it is then, according to Plato, further from the truth because it has been an imitation of an imitation. So when it comes to music, however, Plato describes it as being an imitation of emotion, whereby he, along with this, says, quote, rhythm and music generally are a reproduction expressing the moods of better and worse men, end quote. According to him, music's influence over emotion state is based on the fact that it's an imitation of emotion. So the power of that imitation of emotion has the force to penetrate through our soul. This is the exact reason why Plato's opinion is that music should be a good imitation of music should be a good imitation of good or well-ordered emotion, insofar as being the right music that is educative to the right people. So because he believes that music has so much power to influence our emotion, he believes that it should then be carefully chosen by wise men, and so that it doesn't bond our spiritedness with our bodily appetite. Instead, bonds our spiritedness with logic, educates us, and that it should be the right music for the right people. Aristotle, however, touches on this and does agree with art being an imitation, but acknowledges a wider view of meaning above the visual. To him, music can be a mimesis of the listener's emotional response. And in addition to that, he recognizes the different types of mimesis in art or music, which is representing things as they are or were, or as they are believed to be, and things as they ought to be. Aristotle has an interesting view whereby, whereby he believes that that art may give something that might actually be absent in the actual, meaning that it can also be a contribution to the society of the immaterial. So this is quite a different view, kind of like a counterpart to Plato, because to him, music adds something, that emotion adds something, and he views it in a way that that emotion wasn't there for Plato. He only viewed it as it should be, as the truth, as reality, and that's it. Far from the world of ideas, then it becomes an imitation and is the worst form of art. So it brings me to the question that I would like you all to ask yourselves too. What then determines right or best music in a world of no meaning aside from the meaning that one bestows upon it? That brings me to the existentialism, a philosophical term that refers to one's construction of their own meaning within a world that has no inherent one. With existentialism being a philosophy that basically rejects the idea of inherent value, higher power, or Plato's world of forms, or even for that matter, heaven. Existentialism believes in experiencing, that in order for one to reach a certain phenomenon, you need to make sure you go through the experience, being fair to the experience by not having any preconceived notion. So Arturo Felico, the author of Art and Existentialism, says, quote, feeling and imagination are joined in such a way that image is felt and the feeling is imagined. And our encounters with the art objects are more like encounters with people than with things. Therefore, the fondness of art for existentialism is based more on the interest in the creators or subjects. I read an interesting view of a famous existentialist named, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name very well, but Schopenhauer, I think. I don't know if y'all know him, but he is a big influence to Nietzsche, who is also a very famous existentialist. And he says that music is not a replication of phenomena. That because music is produced by the tones of will, which create feelings and emotion, he believes music to be superior to other art. According to him, it is the highest degree of universal language. And so which confuses me a little bit too, but he believes that imitative music, kind of similar to Plato and Aristotle, imitative music replicates phenomena and reduces its potency, and that it reduces that of the phenomena itself, unlike true music, which he then compares with an analogy of geometrical figures. Geometrical figures come together and form a distinctive form whereby it's like melodies or rhythm. Different melodies come together, formulated within it, representing different emotions and cause objective emotional response, which is why he believes it to be the highest form of universal language. And so I'm going to be giving a representation